The ballroom fell silent the moment Clara Whitmore appeared in that hideous brown dress, the same dress she'd worn to be invisible. But standing across the marble floor was Alexander Blackthorne, the Duke of Ashford, the one man she'd loved in secret for 3 brutal years. His eyes locked onto hers, not with disgust, not with pity, with hunger. In that instant, Clara realized her plan to disappear had backfired catastrophically. She'd wanted to fade into the wallpaper at her father's tedious gathering. Instead, she'd caught the attention of the most dangerous man in England, and there was no escape now. Stay until the end to see how one terrible dress changed everything. Hit like and drop your city in the comments. Let's see where this story is traveling tonight. The morning Clara Whitmore decided to destroy her own reputation, London was drowning in rain. She stood before her wardrobe in the gray light of dawn, fingers trailing across silk and satin, past the pale blues and soft pinks that made her look like every other desperate debutante in Mayfair. Her maid, Margaret, watched with growing alarm as Clara pushed aside gown after gown, searching for something else entirely. "Miss Clara, your father said this luncheon was important," Margaret ventured carefully. "Perhaps the rose silk? Or the cream muslin with the—" "No." Clara's voice was flat, final. "Bring me the brown one." Margaret's face went pale. "Miss, you can't mean the brown wool, the one I wore to Cousin Judith's funeral, the one that makes me look like a Quaker governess who's given up on life." "But, Miss Clara, Margaret—" Clara turned, and something in her expression made the maid fall silent. "I have performed in this circus for 3 seasons. 3 years of smiling until my face ached, of pretending to be fascinated by men who couldn't tell Aristotle from their own arse, of watching women with half my intelligence win proposals because they knew when to giggle and when to swoon. I'm done." Her reflection stared back at her, 21 years old, dark hair that refused to curl fashionably, gray eyes that her mother had once called unfortunately intelligent. Not a beauty by London standards, not soft enough, not sweet enough, not dim enough to be desirable. The brutal arithmetic of the marriage market had been explained to Clara by her own mother before consumption had taken her 4 years prior. "You're clever, darling, and that's your curse. Men want ornaments, not companions. They want mirrors that reflect their own brilliance back at them, not windows that show them how ordinary they truly are." Her mother had been right. 3 seasons had proven it beyond doubt. The first season, Clara had tried. She'd memorized the rules, perfected the performance. She'd laughed at tedious jokes, feigned ignorance about politics and literature, let men explain things to her that she'd understood since childhood. And she'd been ignored anyway, because even pretending to be stupid, she couldn't quite hide the mind that churned beneath. The second season, she'd been honest. She'd debated, challenged, engaged with the men who approached her. They'd fled like rabbits from a fox. The word blue stocking had followed her through every ballroom, whispered like a curse. The third season, this season, she'd simply stopped caring. Now her father, Gerald Whitmore, Earl of Thornfield, was hosting a luncheon for an important guest, and Clara knew exactly what that meant. Another aging lord looking for a young wife to manage his estate and bear his children. Another man who would expect her to transform into a simpering, empty-headed ornament the moment the vows were spoken. Well, she would make it easy for everyone. She would be so aggressively unmarriageable that even her desperate father would have to admit defeat. The brown wool dress was every bit as hideous as she remembered. It had no waist, no shape, no style. The color made her look consumptive. The neckline was high enough to choke her. It was perfect. Margaret laced her into it with shaking hands. "Your father will be furious." "My father has been furious with me since I was 7 years old and corrected his Latin in front of the vicar," Clara said. "I've learned to live with his disappointment." But as she descended the grand staircase an hour later, Clara felt her resolve waver. Not because of her father's inevitable rage, but because of the one exception to her ironclad rules. Alexander Blackthorne, the Duke of Ashford, 32 years old, unmarried, untouchable, brilliant, and the only man Clara had ever loved. She'd met him 3 years ago at a Royal Society lecture that her father had dragged her to, not because he valued her education, but because he needed her to take notes for him. Alexander had been speaking about land reform and agricultural innovation, and Clara had been transfixed. not by his title or his considerable fortune, but by his mind. After the lecture, she'd approached him with a question about crop rotation. He'd answered her seriously, without condescension, without the amused tolerance most men showed when women dared to think. They talked for 30 minutes about soil chemistry and tenant farming before her father had yanked her away. She'd thought about that conversation for months. Since then, she'd seen Alexander perhaps a dozen times, always at a distance, always surrounded by London's most eligible women. Women far more beautiful than Clara, far more accomplished in the arts that actually mattered to society. Women who knew how to angle their faces in candlelight, how to make a man feel like a conquering hero for offering them a glass of lemonade. Clara had never spoken to him again. She'd convinced herself it was better that way. He would never look at someone like her. Too sharp, too difficult, too much. And even if by some miracle he did notice her, she refused to transform herself into the kind of woman a duke was expected to marry. She would rather be alone than be diminished. So she'd buried that futile love deep, locked it away where it couldn't hurt her, and focused on surviving the social season with her integrity intact. Now, approaching the drawing room in her funeral dress, Clara steeled herself for another afternoon of mind-numbing conversation with another interchangeable aristocrat. Her father would be displeased, the guest would be repulsed, and then, finally, perhaps her father would stop parading her in front of men like a horse at auction. She pushed open the drawing room door, and every thought evaporated from her mind. Because standing beside her father, tall and dark and devastating in perfectly tailored black, was Alexander Blackthorne, the Duke of Ashford, here, in her drawing room. No. Clara's heart seized. Her carefully constructed plan, her armor of ugliness and defiance, suddenly felt like the cruelest joke she'd ever played on herself. Of all the men in London, of all the aging lords and desperate second sons her father might have invited, why him? Alexander turned as she entered. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them, something electric and terrifying and completely unexpected. He didn't look away in disgust at her dreadful dress. He didn't smile politely and return his attention to her father. Instead, his dark eyes traveled over her slowly, deliberately, as if he were seeing something fascinating rather than something absurd. Clara felt heat climb her neck. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. He was supposed to dismiss her immediately, to confirm everything she'd already accepted about her place in this world. Instead, he bowed. "Miss Whitmore, what a pleasure to finally speak with you again." Again. He remembered that conversation 3 years ago. He actually remembered. "Your Grace." Her voice came out steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I wasn't aware, my father didn't mention that he'd invited me to luncheon." Alexander's mouth quirked slightly. "No, I imagine he didn't. Your father and I have business to discuss regarding some properties in Yorkshire. I hope my presence isn't an unwelcome intrusion." Unwelcome. The understatement of the century. "Not at all," Clara lied, "though I must apologize for my appearance. I wasn't expecting guests of such distinction." It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it, but Alexander's expression didn't change. If anything, that hint of amusement deepened. "I find your choice refreshing," he said quietly. "London is drowning in pastels and ruffles. It's rather exhausting." Her father cleared his throat loudly. Gerald Whitmore was a broad man who'd run to fat in middle age, with the perpetually irritated expression of someone who'd expected more from life and been consistently disappointed. "Yes, well, Clara has always had unconventional taste. Shall we proceed to the dining room?" Luncheon was a special kind of torture. Clara sat across from Alexander, painfully aware of every bite she took, every word she spoke. Her father dominated the conversation, droning on about estate management and investments, while Alexander listened with practiced patience. But every few minutes, Alexander's gaze would drift to Clara, and every time it did, she felt that same electric shock, that same bewildering sense that he was seeing past the ugly dress to something underneath. It was Margaret who finally changed the dynamic. The maid was serving the second course when she stumbled slightly, catching herself on the edge of Clara's chair. A splash of soup landed on the tablecloth. "Clumsy girl," Gerald snapped. "Can't you do anything properly?" Margaret went scarlet. "I'm so sorry, my lord. You'll finish serving without destroying the rest of the meal. That's what you'll do. Gerald's face was flushed with wine and irritation. Clara felt anger flash through her. Father, it was an accident. Margaret is the best maid we've had in years. Perhaps if you didn't insist on serving wine at noon. Are you criticizing me at my own table? I'm stating facts, which you'd recognize if you weren't 3 glasses deep into. Clara. Her father's voice dropped dangerously low. You will excuse yourself if you cannot maintain civil conversation. The old Clara would have obeyed, would have swallowed her anger and escaped to her room. But something about Alexander's presence, about having the one man she'd ever respected watching this familiar dance, made her reckless. Civil conversation? She repeated. Is that what we're calling your monologues now? I've been sitting here for 40 minutes listening to you explain Yorkshire property law to a duke who almost certainly knows more about the subject than you do. Civility seems to run in only one direction in this house. The silence that followed was devastating. Her father's face went from flushed to purple. How dare you? Miss Whitmore raises a valid point. Both Clara and her father turned to stare at Alexander. The Duke had set down his wine glass and was regarding Gerald with an expression of polite steel. I have been monopolizing the conversation, Alexander continued smoothly, and Miss Whitmore has been unfairly excluded from a discussion that likely interests her far more than the usual drawing room topics. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what are your thoughts on the Enclosure Acts? I remember you had questions about crop rotation when we last spoke. Have you continued your study of agricultural reform? He remembered. Not just the conversation, but the details. Clara's throat tightened. I have, actually. I've been reading Thomas Coke's writings on the Norfolk four-course system. His integration of turnips and clover is brilliant for soil nitrogen, though I think his dismissal of older 3-field rotation is somewhat premature given the capital requirements of his method. Not every estate can afford... She stopped, realizing she was doing exactly what she'd sworn never to do, performing her intelligence, trying to impress a man with her mind. But Alexander was leaning forward, and his eyes were bright. Go on, he said. You were saying about capital requirements? And something broke open in Clara's chest, because he wasn't asking to be polite. He wasn't indulging her the way one might indulge a child reciting poetry. He genuinely wanted to hear what she thought. So she told him. They debated crop rotation, land enclosure, tenant rights, and agricultural innovation while her father sat in stunned silence and the servants forgot to clear the courses. Clara forgot about her hideous dress, forgot about performing or pretending, forgot about everything except the fierce joy of matching wits with someone who could actually keep pace with her. But surely you see the flaw in Coke's assumption, Alexander argued. He's working from a model that assumes unlimited capital and compliant tenants. The reality for most estates is vastly different. Yes, exactly, Clara interrupted, too excited to remember propriety. That's what I've been trying to explain to my father for years. You can't simply import Norfolk methods to Yorkshire soil and expect the same results. The drainage alone requires entirely different infrastructure, Alexander finished, which is precisely why I've been experimenting with hybrid approaches on my own estates, taking Coke's nitrogen principles but adapting them to existing field systems rather than forcing wholesale reorganization. That's brilliant, Clara breathed. The tenants must be far more receptive to gradual innovation than sudden upheaval. They are. Though I'll admit the first 2 years were challenging, change is difficult even when it's beneficial. Change is always difficult, Clara said quietly, especially when it requires people to admit that the old ways might not have been the best ways. Something shifted in Alexander's expression. They weren't talking about agriculture anymore, and they both knew it. Miss Whitmore, he said softly, may I ask you a rather impertinent question? Her heart stopped. You may. Why are you wearing that dress? The bluntness of it should have offended her. Instead, Clara found herself laughing, a real laugh, not the practiced titter expected of young ladies. Because I'm tired of pretending, she said honestly. I wore this dress because I thought it would make me invisible. I thought your presence would be just another tedious afternoon surviving another man who wanted a decoration, not a person. So I armored myself in ugliness, hoping to be dismissed quickly and return to my books. And now? Now I realize I've made a terrible mistake. The air between them had changed, charged, dangerous. A mistake in wearing the dress? Alexander asked. Or a mistake in your assumptions about my intentions? Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. Your Grace, Alexander. What? My name is Alexander, and I would very much like to hear you use it, at least when your father isn't present to be scandalized by the informality. This was insane. This was impossible. Dukes didn't flirt with difficult women in ugly dresses. They didn't remember 3-year-old conversations about crop rotation. They didn't look at women like Clara as if they were precious and fascinating and worth pursuing. I don't understand, Clara whispered. Why are you really here? Because your father wrote to me about a property matter, yes. But also, Alexander paused, and for the first time she saw uncertainty flicker across his features. Because I made inquiries about you. After we spoke that night at the Royal Society lecture, I tried to learn more about you, and what I discovered was that you'd been presented at court, that you'd had 3 seasons, and that you'd refused every offer that came your way. There were no offers, Clara said bitterly. Men don't propose to women who argue with them. No, Alexander agreed. Mediocre men don't. But then, you wouldn't want to marry a mediocre man, would you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Her father chose that moment to slam his palm on the table. Enough of this ridiculous conversation. Your Grace, I apologize for my daughter's behavior. She's always been far too outspoken for her own good. I assure you, with proper guidance, she can be taught. Lord Thornfield, Alexander's voice cut through her father's bluster like a blade. With all due respect, your daughter's conversation has been the most intellectually stimulating I've enjoyed in months, perhaps years. I find nothing about her behavior that requires apology or correction. Gerald's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. In fact, Alexander continued, rising from his chair, I would very much like to continue this discussion. Miss Whitmore, would you do me the honor of joining me for a walk in your garden? I believe the rain has stopped, and I find I'm not quite ready to conclude our debate about tenant agriculture. It wasn't really a question. It was a statement, a declaration, a line being drawn in the sand. Clara looked at her father's outraged expression, at Alexander's extended hand, at the choice being offered to her in this absurd moment. She could refuse. She could retreat to her room, to her books, to the safe prison of invisibility she'd been building for 3 years. Or she could take his hand and step into something terrifying and unknown and absolutely impossible. I would be delighted, Clara heard herself say. And she placed her hand in his. The garden was still wet from the morning rain, droplets clinging to rose petals and lavender stalks. Alexander offered Clara his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the wool of his coat. They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of her father's indignant spluttering fading behind them. You'll pay for that, Clara said quietly. He'll make the rest of the day unbearable. Will he strike you? The bluntness of the question startled her. No, he's never been violent, just disappointed. Constantly, exhaustingly disappointed in the daughter who refused to be decorative. Then he's a fool. Clara stopped walking. Your Grace. Alexander, she amended, the name feeling dangerous on her tongue. Why are you doing this? I'm not the kind of woman men like you pursue. I'm not beautiful or accomplished or remotely suitable for— You're brilliant, Alexander interrupted. You're honest to the point of recklessness. You wore an ugly dress to try to become invisible, and somehow made yourself the most interesting person in this entire city. And I've been half in love with you since you spent 20 minutes arguing with me about soil chemistry 3 years ago. The world tilted. That's impossible, Clara breathed. Why? Because you've decided you're unmarriageable? Because London's idiots couldn't see what was standing right in front of them? Alexander turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. Clara, may I call you Clara? She nodded, incapable of speech. Clara, I have spent 3 years watching you from across ballrooms. 3 years hearing about the difficult Whitmore girl who refused to perform, who sent suitors fleeing, who was too smart for her own good. And every story I heard made me more certain that you were exactly the kind of woman I needed, the kind of woman I'd been looking for without realizing it. This is madness, Clara whispered. You don't know me. Then let me know you. Let me call on you properly. Let me court you the way you deserve to be courted, with honesty and intelligence and respect. He paused. Unless you're telling me you feel nothing, in which case I'll leave now and never trouble you again. Feel nothing? She'd loved him for 3 years from a distance, convinced he was as far beyond her reach as the moon, and now he was here, looking at her like she was something precious, offering her everything she'd never dared to want. I feel... She struggled for words. I feel terrified. Of me? Of hoping, of believing this is real, and then discovering it's just another performance, another game where I'm expected to transform into someone softer and smaller and more acceptable. Alexander's jaw tightened. I will never ask you to be smaller. I will never ask you to pretend or perform or diminish yourself for my comfort or anyone else's. I want you exactly as you are, sharp edges, brutal honesty, terrible dress sense, and all. And Clara, who had sworn never to bend, never to change, never to become less for any man, felt something crack open in her chest. She'd been so certain she had to choose between love and integrity, so convinced that being chosen meant being diminished. But here was a man offering her both. If I say yes, she said slowly, if I let you court me, society will be vicious. They already whisper about me. If a duke starts paying me attention, they'll tear me apart. Let them try. The words were soft, but there was steel beneath them, a promise and a threat combined. Your Grace, Alexander, you don't understand what you're offering. I will embarrass you. I will say the wrong things at the wrong times. I will argue with your friends and horrify your family and refuse to be the perfect duchess everyone expects. Good, Alexander said simply. Perfect is exhausting. I'll take real instead. He was still holding her hand. When had that happened? One condition, Clara said. Name it. If you ever ask me to pretend to be stupider than I am, if you ever make me feel like my mind is something to hide rather than celebrate, if you ever treat me like a beautiful ornament instead of a thinking person, I will walk away. I don't care if we're engaged, married, or 50 years into this partnership. I will not be diminished, not even for you. Agreed. And my condition, if I ever do make you feel that way, you tell me immediately. You fight with me, argue with me, rage at me if necessary. But don't suffer in silence. Don't shrink yourself without giving me a chance to be better. Clara searched his face for deception, for the trap she was certain had to be hiding somewhere in this impossible offer. But all she saw was fierce sincerity and something that looked remarkably like hope. This is insane, she said again. Probably, Alexander agreed. But the alternative is spending the rest of my life pretending to be interested in women who bore me to tears, while the only person in London worth talking to hides in ugly dresses and convinces herself she's unmarriageable. I'm still wearing the ugly dress. I know. His smile was slow and devastating. It's hideous. I can't stop looking at you. And Clara, who had armored herself in ugliness to become invisible, who had worn her worst dress to repel the wrong man, felt herself smile back. My father is going to be insufferable about this. Your father, Alexander said dryly, is currently contemplating whether the potential business alliance with a duke is worth tolerating his daughter's personality. I give it 3 hours before he decides the answer is yes, and starts planning how to claim credit for the match. Clara laughed despite herself. You've met him for 2 hours and you already understand him perfectly. I understand men like him very well. They're everywhere. Men who see brilliant women as problems to be managed rather than people to be cherished. His expression darkened. But you're not his problem to manage anymore. If you'll have me, if you'll take this risk with me, you'll never have to shrink yourself for anyone again. The promise hung between them, terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Clara thought about her mother's words. Men want mirrors, not windows. But Alexander wasn't asking for a mirror. He was asking for an equal, a partner, a person. Ask me again tomorrow, Clara said quietly. When I'm not ambushed and overwhelmed. When I've had time to think clearly. Ask me when I'm certain. Disappointment flickered across Alexander's features, but he nodded. Tomorrow, then. May I call on you at 2 o'clock? Yes. And Clara? He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity racing up her arm. Wear whatever you want. I'll notice you regardless. He left her standing in the garden, heart pounding, world spinning, everything she thought she knew about herself suddenly uncertain. She'd worn her worst dress to disappear. Instead, she'd been seen by the one man who mattered. And tomorrow, she would have to decide if she was brave enough to let herself be loved. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed listening to rain return against the windows, replaying every word Alexander had spoken, every look he'd given her, searching for the deception that had to be hiding somewhere beneath his promises. Men like him didn't pursue women like her. The arithmetic of London society simply didn't allow for it. By dawn, she'd convinced herself it had been a fever dream, some elaborate jest she was too naive to recognize. Alexander would send a note canceling their appointment, citing unexpected business or family obligations, and Clara would return to her books and her isolation with the bitter satisfaction of being proven right about the world. But at 1:30 the following afternoon, Margaret burst into Clara's room with flushed cheeks and wide eyes. "Miss Clara, he's here, the Duke. He's arrived 30 minutes early and he's brought—" She stopped, struggling for words. "He's brought flowers, not the usual roses, something wild. And he's asking for you specifically, not waiting for your father to receive him first." Clara's stomach twisted. "What's my father doing?" "Hovering in the entrance hall like a nervous cat. I've never seen him so uncertain. He keeps smoothing his waistcoat and muttering about propriety." Despite her anxiety, Clara felt a flash of satisfaction. Let her father squirm for once. Let him feel the discomfort of watching someone else control the situation. She'd chosen her dress carefully this morning. Not the hideous brown wool, but not the performative pastels either. A simple day dress in deep green that made her eyes look more gray than usual. Armor of a different kind. Honest, but not aggressively ugly. When she descended the stairs, Alexander was standing in the entrance hall exactly as Margaret had described, impeccably dressed, holding an enormous bouquet of wildflowers that looked like they'd been stolen from a country meadow. Lavender and wild roses, honeysuckle and cornflowers, nothing polished or proper about them. Her father lurked nearby, clearly torn between asserting his authority and avoiding the Duke's displeasure. Alexander's eyes found Clara immediately, and that same electric current from yesterday crackled through the air between them. "Miss Whitmore." He bowed formally, though his eyes held something much less formal. "I hope I'm not too early. I found I was eager to continue our conversation." "Not at all, Your Grace." Clara descended the last few steps, hyper-aware of her father's scrutinizing stare. "Though I must say, your choice of flowers is unconventional." "I thought we'd established yesterday that convention isn't really our strength." He offered her the bouquet. "These reminded me of you, wild and honest. Nothing forced into unnatural shapes to please garden aesthetics." Clara took the flowers and their fingers brushed. The contact sent heat racing up her arm. Her father cleared his throat aggressively. "Yes, well, perhaps you'd prefer the drawing room for your conversation? I'll have tea brought in. And I'll remain nearby, of course, to ensure—" "That won't be necessary," Alexander said pleasantly, but there was steel beneath the courtesy. "Miss Whitmore and I will be walking in the garden again. The weather is surprisingly fine for March, and I find indoor conversation rather stifling." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact delivered in a tone that made contradiction impossible. Gerald's face reddened. "Your Grace, I hardly think it's appropriate for an unmarried woman to be alone with a man who has every intention of courting her honorably?" Alexander's eyebrow rose slightly. "I assure you, Lord Thornfield, my intentions are entirely proper, though if it eases your concern, perhaps a maid could accompany us at a discreet distance." Before her father could respond, Clara spoke up. "Margaret can join us. She'll stay far enough back to preserve our conversation, but close enough to satisfy propriety's demands." The compromise was accepted because no one could think of a reasonable objection. Minutes later, Clara found herself walking beside Alexander through the garden again, Margaret trailing 20 paces behind like an uncomfortable chaperone. "You look terrified," Alexander observed quietly. "I am terrified." "Of me? Of this? Of hoping for something that seems impossible? Clara kept her eyes on the gravel path ahead. I spent last night convincing myself you'd cancel, that yesterday was some elaborate joke I was too desperate to recognize. And yet here I am. 30 minutes early, in fact, because I was worried you'd spend the morning talking yourself out of this. Clara glanced at him sharply. How did you? Because I know what it's like to convince yourself you're unlovable. Alexander's voice was quiet but fierce. I know what it's like to be told repeatedly that the things that make you who you are, your intelligence, your honesty, your refusal to perform, are flaws rather than virtues. And I know how hard it is to believe someone when they say they see those things differently. They walked in silence for a moment. Behind them, Margaret maintained her discreet distance, pretending to examine roses. Tell me something true, Clara said suddenly. Something you've never told anyone else. Alexander considered this. I hate being a duke. Clara stopped walking. What? Not the responsibility or the work. I actually enjoy estate management and the political aspects, but the performance of it. The expectation that I should want a wife who smiles prettily and stays silent while I make decisions. That I should prefer beautiful emptiness over stimulating conversation. He turned to face her fully. I've had 3 serious courtships in the past 5 years, all with women who are exactly what a duchess is supposed to be. Accomplished, beautiful, impeccably bred. And I ended every one because the thought of spending my life with someone I couldn't talk to made me want to throw myself in the Thames. Your family must have been thrilled. My mother has a list of acceptable candidates that she updates quarterly. Your name is definitely not on it. Clara laughed despite herself. I imagine not. Too difficult, too outspoken, and worst of all, too interesting. Exactly. Alexander's expression softened. Clara, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if you let me court you properly, it's going to be brutal. London society will savage you. They'll question your worth, mock your appearance, spread vicious rumors about why a duke would possibly be interested in someone so unconventional. You're not exactly selling this well. I'm being honest, because I won't trick you into this. I won't let you walk into that battlefield without knowing exactly what you're facing. He caught her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. But I promise you this, I will stand beside you through every whisper, every slight, every attempt to tear you down. I will make my choice so undeniably clear that no one can question it, and anyone who insults you will answer to me. Clara's throat tightened. Why? Why would you put yourself through that for someone you barely know? Because I'm tired of pretending I don't know exactly what I want. And what I want is a partner, not an ornament. Someone who challenges me and argues with me and makes me think. Someone real. His thumb traced circles on her palm, and Clara felt her resolve crumbling. Let me prove it to you. Let me show you that this isn't a jest or a passing fancy. Give me a chance to earn your trust. She should say no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was too good to be true, too dangerous, too likely to end in heartbreak. But Clara had spent 3 years being rational, 3 years protecting herself from hope and disappointment. And where had it gotten her? Alone in ugly dresses, armored against a world that didn't want her anyway. 1 month, she heard herself say. Court me properly for 1 month. If at the end of that time you still feel the same way, we'll discuss what comes next. And if at the end of the month you decide I'm not worth the risk, then I'll thank you for the most interesting month of my life and return to my books without regret. It was a lie. They both knew she'd regret it terribly, but Alexander smiled anyway. 1 month then, starting now. He raised her hand to his lips again, and this time the kiss lingered. What shall we do first? You could start by telling me why you really came to see my father yesterday. Property business in Yorkshire seems like a convenient excuse. Alexander's smile turned slightly sheepish. You caught that, did you? I'm observant. It's one of my many unmarriageable qualities. There is property business, but I also may have engineered the meeting. I heard your father was considering accepting an offer from Lord Halverton for your hand. Clara's blood went cold. Halverton? That decrepit fossil is nearly 60 years old. 63, according to my sources. Widowed twice, 5 children, and desperately seeking a young wife to manage his household and provide him with more heirs. Alexander's expression darkened. Your father was seriously considering it. The settlement Halverton offered was substantial. Of course he was. Bitterness flooded Clara's mouth. Why keep a daughter who embarrasses you when you can sell her to the highest bidder? That's why I came. I made your father a better offer. My interest in you in exchange for preferential terms on a property deal he's been desperate to close. He took it immediately. Clara pulled her hand free. You bought me? No. Alexander's voice turned sharp. I bought your father's cooperation in letting me court you. There's a difference. You still have complete choice in this. If you tell me right now that you want nothing to do with me, I'll honor that, and your father can't do anything about it. But I wasn't going to stand by and watch you be sold off to a man like Halverton because your father values money over your happiness. The anger drained from Clara as quickly as it had risen. You manipulated the situation, ruthlessly. That's rather underhanded. I'm a duke. Manipulation is basically my primary skill set. He paused. Are you angry? Clara considered this. She should be furious. He'd maneuvered her father like a chess piece, arranged circumstances to his advantage, all without consulting her first. But he'd also saved her from a fate worse than spinsterhood, marriage to a man who would treat her like a particularly troublesome piece of furniture. I'm not angry, she said finally. I'm impressed, actually, and grateful, though I'd prefer you consult me before making deals that involve my future. Noted and agreed. No more manipulation without your explicit approval. They walked on, the tension between them shifting into something warmer, more comfortable. Margaret continued her awkward trailing, probably freezing in the March air, but too dutiful to complain. Tell me something else true, Clara said. What scares you most about this? About us? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. That you'll realize I'm not the man you've built up in your imagination. That you've been in love with an idea rather than a person, and when you see all my flaws and failures, you'll be disappointed. Clara's heart stuttered. I never said I was in love with you. You didn't have to. I saw it in your eyes yesterday when you walked into that drawing room, the same way you probably saw it in mine. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. That's rather presumptuous. Is it wrong? She could lie, should lie, protect herself with denial and maintain the careful distance that had kept her safe for 3 years. But Alexander had asked for truth, and Clara was so tired of pretending. No, she whispered. It's not wrong. I've been halfway in love with you since that night at the Royal Society. I told myself it was foolish, that you'd never look at someone like me. So I buried it and convinced myself I was better off alone. And now? Now I'm terrified that I'll let myself believe this is real, and you'll wake up one morning and realize you've made a terrible mistake courting the most unmarriageable woman in London. Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Clara Whitmore, listen to me very carefully. You are not unmarriageable. You are extraordinary. And the only mistake I could make is letting you convince yourself otherwise. Before Clara could respond, Margaret's voice called out from behind them, sharp with alarm. Miss Clara, company approaching. They both turned. Through the garden gate, Clara could see a small group of women approaching, 4 of them, all dressed in the height of fashion, all wearing expressions of barely concealed malice. Clara's stomach dropped. She recognized them immediately. Lady Pemberton, the reigning queen of London society, beautiful, wealthy, and viciously protective of the social hierarchy she sat atop. Miss Charlotte Hartwick and Miss Amelia Thornbury, Pemberton's loyal followers. Pretty, accomplished girls who'd never had an original thought between them. And leading the pack with a smile like poisoned honey was Lady Catherine Ashford, Alexander's cousin. Oh dear, Clara murmured. Oh damn, Alexander corrected quietly. I was hoping we'd have more time before they found out. Lady Catherine reached the garden gate first, her pale blue dress immaculate despite the damp ground, her golden curls perfectly arranged beneath a fashionable bonnet. She was everything Clara wasn't, beautiful, polished, effortlessly charming. Alexander! Catherine's voice was bright and cheerful and completely false. What a delightful surprise! We were just calling on Lady Thornfield for afternoon tea, and I couldn't help but notice your carriage outside. How fortunate that we should meet here. Translation. They'd heard about yesterday's luncheon and come specifically to investigate. Catherine, Alexander's tone was pleasant but distant. Ladies, what brings you to the Whitmore residence? Why, social courtesy, of course. Lady Pemberton stepped forward, her sharp eyes taking in Clara's simple dress, her wind-blown hair, her hand still resting in the crook of Alexander's arm. We've been terribly remiss in welcoming Miss Whitmore back to London this season. 3 seasons now, isn't it, dear? Time simply flies. The emphasis on 3 seasons was deliberate, a reminder that Clara had failed to secure a husband while other girls married off in their first. How kind of you to finally notice my existence, Clara said dryly. I've only been attending the same events as you for 3 years. I was beginning to think I'd developed the power of invisibility. Miss Hartwick tittered nervously. Lady Pemberton's smile sharpened. Yes, well, you do tend to blend into the wallpaper, don't you? So industrious with your books and your serious conversations. Pemberton's gaze slid to Alexander with calculated innocence. Though it seems you found a way to capture the Duke's attention. How unexpected. Is it? Alexander's voice had gone cold. I find Miss Whitmore's company far more stimulating than most. Her knowledge of agricultural reform alone is more impressive than entire ballrooms full of accomplished young ladies, see? Catherine interrupted smoothly. Yes, I'm sure she's very knowledgeable about crops and soil. How charming. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Though I must confess, Alexander, I'm surprised to find you here. When last we spoke, you mentioned how exhausting you found the London season. I assumed you'd returned to Ashford Manor by now. Plans change. Clearly. Catherine's gaze shifted to Clara, and something cruel flickered beneath her perfect facade. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, how do you find the season this year? Any promising prospects? It was a trap disguised as polite conversation. Any answer Clara gave would be wrong. If she mentioned Alexander, she'd seem presumptuous. If she denied any prospects, she'd look desperate. If she deflected, she'd appear evasive. But Clara had spent 3 years learning to navigate these conversational minefields. I find this season much like the others, she said evenly, full of tedious small talk, performative courtesy, and people pretending to be interested in each other when really they're just calculating social advantage. Present company excluded, of course. The smile on Pemberton's face went glacial. How refreshingly honest, though one might argue that success in society requires a certain level of discretion. The ability to play the game rather than criticizing it from the sidelines. One might argue that, Clara agreed. One might also argue that a game rigged in favor of empty prettiness over genuine substance isn't worth playing at all. Miss Thornbury gasped. Hartwick looked scandalized. Catherine's eyes narrowed. But Lady Pemberton simply laughed, a cold tinkling sound devoid of humor. My dear girl, you sound bitter, though I suppose that's understandable. 3 seasons must be rather taxing when one lacks the natural advantages that help other girls succeed. Her gaze raked over Clara's simple dress, her unfashionable hair. Not everyone can be beautiful or accomplished. Some of us must rely on other qualities to attract attention. The insult was so blatant, so deliberately cruel that even Margaret inhaled sharply from her position near the gate. Clara felt heat flood her cheeks. Not embarrassment, rage, pure incandescent fury at this woman who thought beauty gave her the right to casually destroy someone else. But before Clara could respond, Alexander stepped forward. Lady Pemberton. His voice was soft, but there was something lethal beneath it. I'm going to give you one opportunity to retract that statement and apologize to Miss Whitmore. Pemberton blinked, clearly not expecting the Duke to intervene so directly. Your Grace, I meant no offense. I was merely observing. You were deliberately insulting a woman under the guise of social conversation, and you did so in my presence, which suggests you believe I share your contempt for intelligence and honesty. Alexander's expression was carved from ice. Let me be absolutely clear. I don't. In fact, I find Miss Whitmore's qualities far more valuable than the natural advantages you seem to prize so highly. The garden had gone utterly silent. Catherine stepped forward, clearly trying to smooth over the situation. Alexander, surely, Catherine, you brought these women here to test Miss Whitmore, to see if the rumors about my interest in her were true, and if so, to what extent I'd defend her against society's judgment. Alexander's gaze swept over all 4 women with cold precision. Consider this your answer. My interest is genuine. My defense, absolute. And anyone who attempts to diminish or mock Miss Whitmore will find themselves on the wrong side of my favor. Is that understood? Lady Pemberton had gone pale beneath her powder. Your Grace, I assure you. Do you understand? The steel in those 3 words made even Clara shiver. Yes, Pemberton whispered. Of course. My apologies, Miss Whitmore. I spoke without thinking. It was a weak apology, forced and resentful. But Clara accepted it with a slight nod, more because she was too stunned to do anything else. Alexander had just publicly chosen her over London's most influential social leader. He'd drawn a line so clear, so undeniable, that everyone in the garden understood exactly where his loyalties lay. It was simultaneously the most romantic and most terrifying thing Clara had ever witnessed. Catherine was staring at her cousin with something between shock and calculation. Alexander, might I have a word with you? Privately? No. It's about family matters. Then it can wait. Alexander turned his back on his cousin, a deliberate dismissal that made all 4 women stiffen. Ladies, if you'll excuse us, Miss Whitmore and I were in the middle of a conversation. I'm sure you have other calls to make. It was a dismissal, absolute and final. Lady Pemberton recovered her composure enough to curtsy stiffly. Of course, Your Grace. Miss Whitmore. Her smile was pure venom. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other. The season has only just begun, after all. The threat was implicit. This isn't over. They swept away in a rustle of silk and wounded pride, leaving Clara and Alexander standing in the suddenly quiet garden. Clara waited until they were out of earshot before turning to face him. That was monumentally stupid, she said. Alexander blinked. I beg your pardon? You just made an enemy of the most powerful woman in London society. She'll make it her personal mission to destroy both of us now. Every event we attend, every social gathering, she'll be there with her knives out. Clara's hands were shaking. You should have let me handle it. By letting her insult you without consequence? Absolutely not. By playing her game, by deflecting and surviving and not making myself a target. Clara pulled away from him, pacing the garden path. Don't you understand? Women like Pemberton don't fight fairly. They'll spread rumors, turn people against us, make our lives unbearable. And you've just given her motivation to do it. So what was I supposed to do? Stand there while she called you ugly and unmarriageable? Thank her politely and pretend it didn't matter? Yes, because that's how you survive in this world when you're not powerful enough to fight back. But I am powerful enough. Alexander caught her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Clara, I know you're used to fighting these battles alone, used to absorbing cruelty and insults because you had no choice. But you're not alone anymore. And I will not stand silently by while someone attacks the woman I'm courting. The woman you've been courting for 1 day, Clara shot back. You barely know me, and you've just declared war on half of London society for my sake. What happens when you realize I'm not worth it? Stop it. Alexander's voice turned fierce. Stop assuming you're not worth defending. Stop expecting me to abandon you the moment things get difficult. I told you I would stand beside you through every whisper and every slight, and I meant it. You don't understand what you're signing up for. Then explain it to me. The words hung between them, sharp and desperate. Clara took a shaking breath. When I was 17, I made the mistake of correcting Lord Hampton at a dinner party. He'd made a factual error about Roman history, and I couldn't help myself. I corrected him politely, cited my sources, tried to be respectful about it. Her voice went hollow. He laughed, called me a presumptuous little blue-stocking who clearly hadn't been raised properly. And then he told my father that I needed to be broken of my unfortunate habits before I'd be marriageable. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. My father agreed. For the next 6 months, he forbade me from reading anything except fashion plates and poetry. He hired tutors to teach me proper deportment, how to simper and smile and stay quiet. He monitored every conversation I had, every word I spoke, trying to train the intelligence out of me like you'd train a dog not to bark. Clara's hands clenched into fists. It didn't work. I'm incapable of pretending to be stupid, but I learned something important. The world punishes women who refuse to perform, and the punishment is relentless. Clara, I survived by becoming invisible, she continued, the words pouring out now that she'd started. By armoring myself in ugly dresses and sharp words, by making myself so aggressively unmarriageable that men stopped looking at me at all. It was lonely, but it was safe. And now you're asking me to step back into that battlefield, to make myself visible again, to become a target, and I'm terrified. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but absolute. I understand why you're scared. But Clara, you can't live your entire life in hiding. You can't shrink yourself into invisibility just to avoid being hurt. That's not surviving. That's slowly disappearing. It's all I know how to do. Then let me teach you something different. Let me show you what it's like to have someone powerful in your corner, someone who won't let you be diminished or dismissed or destroyed. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I can't promise this will be easy, but I can promise you won't face it alone. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to be brave enough to try. And Clara, who had convinced herself that bravery meant isolation, who had armored herself against hope for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, felt something crack open in her chest. 1 month, she whispered. You have 1 month to prove this is real. But Alexander, if you betray me, if you make me regret this, I will never forgive you. Fair enough. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, gentle and reverent. And if I prove myself, if I show you that this is worth the risk, then we'll face whatever comes next together. Together, Alexander agreed. And in that moment, standing in her father's garden with society's judgment already sharpening its knives, Clara made the most dangerous decision of her life. She chose to hope. Behind them, Margaret cleared her throat awkwardly. Miss Clara, your father is watching from the study window, and he looks concerned. Clara glanced toward the house. Sure enough, Gerald's face was pressed against the glass, his expression caught between calculation and alarm. He's probably trying to decide if your very public defense of me increases or decreases my marriage value, Clara said dryly. Definitely increases it, Alexander said, which is why he'll start treating you marginally better, at least until the wedding. If there's a wedding. When, Alexander corrected firmly. But we have a month to get there. What should we do first? Clara considered this. Lady Pemberton and her followers were already spreading word of what had happened. By tonight, half of London would know that the Duke of Ashford was courting the unmarriageable Whitmore girl. The gossip would be vicious, which meant they needed to control the narrative before it spiraled completely out of hand. Take me to Hyde Park tomorrow, Clara said suddenly. During the fashionable hour, when everyone will be there. Alexander raised an eyebrow. That's bold. That's the point. If we're going to do this, we do it publicly. No hiding, no shame. Let them see exactly who you're choosing and why. They'll tear you apart. Let them try. Clara straightened her shoulders, feeling something fierce and reckless kindle in her chest. I'm done hiding. If I'm going to be judged, I'll be judged while standing beside you, not cowering in corners hoping no one notices me. Alexander's smile was slow and devastating. There's the woman I was hoping for, not invisible at all. No, Clara agreed, not anymore. She had no idea if she was being brave or catastrophically stupid, but for the first time in 3 years, Clara Whitmore wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. The next afternoon, Clara dressed for battle. Not in armor this time, but in truth. She chose a walking dress of deep burgundy, striking without being scandalous, elegant without pretending to be something she wasn't. Margaret arranged her hair simply, no elaborate curls or fashionable ornaments, just Clara, unadorned and unashamed. You're certain about this, miss? Margaret asked, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the last button. Hyde Park during the fashionable hour. Everyone will be watching. That's the point. Clara met her own eyes in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked terrified but determined. I'm done being invisible. When Alexander's carriage arrived at precisely 3 o'clock, her father was waiting in the entrance hall with an expression Clara had never seen before, something caught between pride and profound anxiety. Clara, he cleared his throat. A word before you leave. She paused, one hand on the doorframe. Yes? The Duke's attentions toward you are significant. Life-altering if they prove genuine. Gerald's face worked uncomfortably. I know I haven't been the most understanding father, but I need you to comprehend what's at stake here. If you embarrass him, if you say something inappropriate or challenge him publicly, you'll lose your profitable property deal, Clara finished flatly. Yes, Father, I understand perfectly. Your concern for my well-being is touching. That's not what I... He stopped, jaw tightening. Just be careful. The world is watching you now. Don't give them ammunition. Clara almost laughed. Her entire existence had been ammunition for London society, but she simply nodded and stepped outside. Alexander was waiting beside his open carriage, dressed impeccably in charcoal gray that made his dark eyes even more intense. When he saw her, something flickered across his face, relief mixed with admiration. You look ready for war, he said quietly, helping her into the carriage. I feel ready for war. Good. He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Because we're about to walk directly into the lion's den, and the lions have been sharpening their claws all night. The ride to Hyde Park took 15 minutes that felt like 15 seconds. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as they approached Rotten Row, the wide, tree-lined avenue where London's elite gathered each afternoon to see and be seen. The moment Alexander's carriage appeared, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Women in elaborate day dresses leaned toward each other, fans fluttering. Men on horseback pulled their mounts aside to get a better view. Everyone was watching, waiting, judging. Clara felt her courage waver. Then Alexander's hand found hers, hidden in the folds of her skirt where no one could see. His fingers laced through hers, warm and solid and utterly certain. Breathe, he murmured. I'm right here. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. Alexander stepped down first, then turned and offered Clara his hand, not hidden, not subtle. A public declaration visible to every gossip and social climber in the park. Clara took his hand and descended into the arena. The effect was instantaneous. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Lady Pemberton, holding court near the Serpentine with a cluster of fashionable women, went rigid. Catherine Ashford, walking with a group of young ladies, froze like a deer scenting danger. But Alexander simply tucked Clara's hand into the crook of his arm and began walking as if this were the most natural thing in the world. As if parading the unmarriageable Whitmore girl through Hyde Park at the height of the social season was perfectly unremarkable. They're staring, Clara whispered. Let them. They'd barely walked 20 paces when the first assault came. Lord Weatherby, a portly man in his 50s with a florid face and a reputation for cruelty disguised as humor, stepped directly into their path. Ashford, what an unexpected pleasure. His eyes slid to Clara with poorly concealed contempt. And Miss Whitmore, how surprising to see you here. I wasn't aware you frequented the fashionable hour. Don't you usually prefer the library? The insult was clear. Clara didn't belong here among her betters. Lord Weatherby. Alexander's tone was pleasant ice. Actually, Miss Whitmore has been joining me to discuss estate management. Her insights on agricultural reform have been invaluable, though I don't expect someone who still uses medieval farming techniques to appreciate the value of modern innovation. Weatherby's face went purple. I beg your pardon? You should. Your tenants certainly do. They've been complaining about your outdated methods for years. Perhaps if you spent less time gossiping in Hyde Park and more time actually managing your lands, they'd be more productive. Alexander smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have more interesting conversations to pursue. He guided Clara past the sputtering lord before Weatherby could formulate a response. That was brutal, Clara murmured. That was necessary. Weatherby is Pemberton's closest ally. If we let him land the first blow without responding, it signals weakness. Alexander's grip on her arm tightened slightly. I told you I'd defend you. I meant against everyone. They continued walking. More stares followed. More whispers. Clara caught fragments of conversation carried on the afternoon breeze. Ugh, can't possibly be serious. 3 failed seasons. What could he possibly see in her? Each word was a small knife, sharp and precise. But Alexander kept walking, kept his expression calm and proud, kept Clara anchored to his side like she belonged there. They rounded a bend near the Serpentine, and Clara's breath caught. A group of young women stood ahead, blocking the path. Not accidentally, deliberately. 8 of them, all dressed in the height of fashion, all wearing expressions of calculated cruelty. And at their center, like a general commanding her troops, stood Lady Pemberton. "Your Grace," Pemberton's voice was honey over steel. "How fortuitous! We were just discussing the most fascinating topic. Perhaps you and Miss Whitmore could help settle a debate." It was a trap. Clara knew it. Alexander knew it. But refusing to engage would look like cowardice, and Pemberton had positioned her group to make walking around them impossible without obvious rudeness. "What topic might that be?" Alexander asked evenly. "The qualities that make a woman suitable for marriage into the highest ranks of society." Pemberton's smile was razor-sharp. "Miss Thornberry here believes that beauty and accomplishment are paramount. Miss Hartwick argues for impeccable breeding and family connections. But I maintain that the most important quality is knowing one's place in the social order. Don't you agree?" The attack was masterful in its subtlety. Pemberton wasn't directly insulting Clara. She was forcing Alexander to either defend qualities Clara didn't possess or agree that Clara was unsuitable for him. Clara felt Alexander tense beside her. Before he could respond, she spoke. "I disagree entirely." Every eye turned to her. Pemberton's smile widened, smelling blood in the water. "Oh? Do enlighten us, Miss Whitmore. What qualities do you believe matter most?" Clara knew she should deflect, should make some polite non-answer that satisfied no one but avoided confrontation. That's what the old Clara would have done. But the old Clara had been hiding, and Clara was done hiding. "Intelligence," she said clearly. "Honesty. The courage to be yourself rather than performing whatever role society demands. The strength to stand beside a partner as an equal rather than ornament them as a possession." Her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "Those are the qualities that matter. Everything else, beauty, accomplishment, knowing one's place, those are just ways of keeping women small and manageable." The silence that followed was absolute. Miss Thornberry looked scandalized. Miss Hartwick had gone pale. Even some of the women in Pemberton's group shifted uncomfortably. But Pemberton herself simply laughed, that same cold, crystalline sound from yesterday. "How very radical of you, Miss Whitmore. Though I suppose when one lacks beauty, accomplishment, and proper breeding, one must disparage their importance. Tell me, do you truly believe a duke, a man of Alexander's standing and consequence, should marry based on these unconventional criteria of yours?" "I believe," Clara said quietly, "that any man worth marrying would value substance over performance, and any man who doesn't isn't worth having, regardless of his title." "Then you must think very little of most of London's gentlemen. How terribly sad for you." Pemberton's eyes glittered with malice. "Though I suppose when one has been rejected by every eligible man in society for 3 consecutive seasons, one must find ways to justify the failure. Easier to claim the system is flawed than to admit one simply isn't desirable." The words landed like physical blows. Clara felt heat flood her face, felt shame and rage war in her chest. But before she could respond, Alexander stepped forward. "Lady Pemberton." His voice was soft, dangerous. "You've made a critical miscalculation." Pemberton blinked. "Your Grace? You assumed that attacking Miss Whitmore would force me to choose between defending her and maintaining social peace. You thought I'd prioritize my standing in society over her dignity." Alexander's expression was carved from granite. "You were wrong." He turned to face the growing crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation. At least 30 people now, all watching, all listening, all hungry for scandal. "Let me be absolutely clear," Alexander said, his voice carrying across the park. "I am courting Miss Clara Whitmore with every intention of making her my Duchess. Not despite her intelligence, honesty, and refusal to perform, but because of those qualities. I have spent years searching for a woman who could challenge me, engage me, stand beside me as an equal partner. And I've found her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Pemberton had gone white. "Furthermore," Alexander continued, his tone turning to steel, "anyone who insults Miss Whitmore insults me. Anyone who questions her worth questions my judgment. And anyone who attempts to diminish her will find themselves permanently excluded from my social circle, my political influence, and my favor. Is that clear?" The silence was deafening. Clara stood frozen, heart hammering, unable to believe what she was hearing. Alexander had just publicly claimed her, not tentatively, not with careful qualifications, but absolutely. In front of half of London society. He'd declared war for her sake. Lady Pemberton recovered first, though her voice shook slightly. "Your Grace, surely you don't mean every word." Alexander turned back to her, and the coldness in his eyes made even Clara shiver. "You have a choice, Lady Pemberton. You can accept Miss Whitmore's place in my life with grace and courtesy, or you can continue your campaign of cruelty and discover exactly how isolated your life becomes when I withdraw my support for your social endeavors." It was a nuclear threat. Pemberton's entire position in society depended on the favor of powerful men like Alexander. Without his support, her influence would crumble. "You can't be serious," Pemberton whispered. "Over her? Watch me." For a long moment, no one moved. The entire park seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if Pemberton would back down or double her assault. Finally, moving as if every muscle hurt, Lady Pemberton curtsied, stiffly, resentfully. "My apologies, Miss Whitmore," she said, each word clearly costing her. "I spoke hastily. I'm sure you and the Duke will be very happy together." It was a surrender, bitter and forced, but a surrender nonetheless. The crowd began to disperse, whispers exploding like fireworks. Clara caught fragments as people hurried away to spread the news. Actually claimed her publicly. Pemberton had to apologize. Never seen anything like it. Alexander guided Clara away from the scene, his hand still firm on her arm. They walked in silence until they'd put distance between themselves and the gossips. Only then did Clara's legs start to shake. "I need to sit down," she managed. Alexander immediately steered her toward a bench beneath a massive oak tree, away from prying eyes. The moment she sat, Clara's hands began to tremble uncontrollably. "Breathe," Alexander said gently, sitting beside her. "Just breathe." "You just destroyed Lady Pemberton's social power for me," Clara whispered. "You made yourself a target. I told you I would stand beside you through every slight and whisper. I meant it. This is more than whispers. This is open warfare," Clara's voice cracked. "She'll spend the rest of her life trying to destroy us both. And everyone who witnessed that will choose sides. Half of London will hate us. Let them." Alexander caught her shaking hands in his. "Clara, listen to me. I didn't just defend you out of some misguided chivalry. I meant every word I said. You are extraordinary. You are exactly the woman I want beside me, and I will not allow society to make you feel otherwise. But the cost is worth it. You're worth it." His grip tightened. "Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not courting you as some charitable gesture or temporary fascination. I'm choosing you, permanently, absolutely, and nothing, not Pemberton, not society, not the entire aristocracy combined, will change that." Clara stared at him, seeing the absolute conviction in his dark eyes. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't strategy or manipulation. It was real. Alexander Blackthorne, Duke of Ashford, one of the most powerful men in England, had just chosen her over society's approval, over comfort, over the easy path. "You're insane," she whispered. "Probably." He smiled, and it transformed his face. "But I'm also certain. Are you?" Was she? Clara had spent 3 years convinced she was unmarriageable, unworthy, too difficult to love. And now here was Alexander, offering her everything she'd never dared to want. But accepting meant stepping fully into the battlefield, meant enduring the hatred of women like Pemberton, the whispers, the social exclusion, meant making herself vulnerable in ways she'd sworn never to risk again. "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "I know. But Clara, are you certain? About me? About us?" She searched his face, looking for doubt or calculation, or the moment when he'd realize what a terrible mistake he was making. But all she saw was fierce determination and something that looked remarkably like love. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I'm certain." "Then marry me." The world stopped. What? Clara's voice came out as a whisper. Marry me. Not in a month. Not after some prolonged courtship where society has time to tear us apart. Marry me now, this week, before Pemberton and her allies can organize their counterattack, before your father can use you as a bargaining chip again, before anyone can convince you that you're not worth having. That's insane. That's strategic and honest. Alexander's hands framed her face. Clara, I told you I've been half in love with you for 3 years. I don't need more time to be certain. I need you safe, protected by my name and my power before the wolves close in. Your family will be furious. My family doesn't get a vote. Society will say I trapped you. Society can go to hell. Clara's head was spinning. This was happening too fast, too suddenly. She should demand time to think, to consider all the implications, to be rational about a decision that would determine the rest of her life. But rationality had never gotten her anywhere. 3 years of being careful and strategic had left her isolated and miserable. Maybe it was time to be reckless instead. Yes, Clara breathed. Yes, I'll marry you. Alexander's smile was brilliant, transformative. He leaned forward, and for one heart-stopping moment, Clara thought he might kiss her right there in the middle of Hyde Park where anyone could see. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, You won't regret this. I swear it. They sat there for a long moment, the world continuing around them while they existed in their own small pocket of certainty and terror. Finally, Alexander pulled back. We need to move quickly. I'll procure a special license tonight. We can marry in 3 days at my private chapel. Small ceremony, just witnesses. Nothing elaborate. I know you'd hate that anyway. 3 days? Clara's voice rose slightly. Alexander, that's necessary. The moment word spreads about what just happened, the attacks will intensify. Your father might try to interfere. Catherine will certainly attempt to sabotage this. We need to present them with a fait accompli before they can organize opposition. He was right. Clara knew he was right. But 3 days felt impossibly soon to commit her entire life to someone she'd had exactly 2 real conversations with. As if reading her mind, Alexander said quietly, If you need more time, no. Clara straightened her shoulders. No, you're right. If we're doing this, we do it decisively, before I lose my courage or you come to your senses. I'm not going to come to my senses. You say that now. Wait until you've spent a full day with me. I'm argumentative, stubborn, and I have opinions about everything. I know, it's wonderful. Despite everything, Clara laughed. You're either the bravest man in London or the most foolish. Can't I be both? They stood together, and Alexander offered his arm again. Shall we continue our walk? Give the gossips something else to whisper about? Might as well. We've already destroyed half my reputation. May as well finish the job. They walked on, and true to prediction, every eye in the park followed them. But this time, Clara didn't feel like prey being stalked by predators. She felt like a woman who'd made a choice. Dangerous, reckless, possibly catastrophic, but hers. They were nearly back to the carriage when Catherine Ashford stepped into their path. Alexander's cousin looked pale but composed, her beautiful face carefully neutral. But her eyes held something cold and calculating that made Clara's stomach tighten. Alexander, Miss Whitmore. Catherine's voice was pleasant, but there was steel beneath it. Might I have a word? It's rather urgent family business. Catherine, we've already discussed. It concerns your mother. Catherine's gaze flicked to Clara, then back to Alexander. She's learned about your intentions regarding Miss Whitmore, and she's rather distressed. Alexander's expression hardened. My mother's distress is not my concern. Perhaps it should be. She's threatening to cut your allowance from the family trust. Something about ensuring you don't make decisions you'll regret. Catherine smiled thinly. I'm merely the messenger. It was a power play. The Duchess of Ashford controlled substantial wealth independent of Alexander's ducal inheritance. Threatening to withhold it was meant to pressure him into reconsidering. Clara started to pull away from Alexander's arm. Perhaps you should speak with your family. No. Alexander's grip tightened, keeping her close. Catherine, you can tell my mother that I'm 32 years old and I don't require her approval or her money. I have sufficient independent wealth from my own estates. Her attempts at manipulation won't work. Catherine's mask slipped slightly, showing frustration beneath. Alexander, be reasonable. You're throwing away your entire future for a woman you barely know. A woman who… Who what? Alexander's voice went dangerously soft. Finish that sentence, Catherine. I'm curious what you were about to say about my future wife. Future wife? The words sent electricity through Clara's veins. Catherine's jaw tightened. A woman who is completely unsuitable for the position of Duchess. She has no connections, no fortune, no accomplishments that matter in our world. She'll embarrass you at every turn. Then I'll be embarrassed. Happily. You're being a fool. Perhaps. But I'm being a fool who's finally doing something honest instead of performing for an audience of people whose approval I don't actually want. Alexander's voice was calm but absolute. Tell my mother I'll call on her tomorrow to inform her personally of my engagement. And Catherine, if you continue attempting to undermine my relationship with Miss Whitmore, you'll find yourself significantly less welcome in my homes and at my social events, family or not. Catherine went rigid. You'd choose her over your own blood. Without hesitation. For a moment, Catherine looked genuinely hurt beneath her anger. Then her expression shuddered completely. You'll regret this, she said quietly. Both of you. When society tears you apart, when your marriage crumbles under the weight of everyone's contempt, when you realize you've sacrificed everything for nothing, you'll remember I warned you. She swept away in a rustle of expensive silk, leaving Clara and Alexander standing alone. Clara's chest felt tight. She's your cousin, your family. She's wrong. Alexander turned to face Clara fully. Clara, you need to understand something. My family has been trying to control my life since I inherited the title at age 23. My mother has paraded eligible women in front of me for nearly a decade, each one carefully selected to be beautiful, biddable, and completely devoid of original thought. Catherine has been her primary accomplice in these schemes. I'm done performing for their expectations. But if your mother cuts you off, she won't. It's an empty threat designed to make me panic and reconsider. And even if she does, I have more than enough wealth to maintain our lifestyle. He caught Clara's hands. But even if I didn't, even if marrying you meant genuine poverty, I would still choose you. Do you believe me? Clara wanted to, but a lifetime of being told she wasn't worth choosing made belief difficult. I'm trying to, she whispered. Then let me prove it. 3 days. Give me 3 days to show you that this is real, that I'm certain, that you are worth everything I'm risking. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. Can you do that? Clara thought about Lady Pemberton's vicious words, about Catherine's warnings, about the storm of gossip and hatred that was undoubtedly already spreading through London's drawing rooms. She thought about 3 years of hiding, of making herself small, of convincing herself she was better off alone. And then she thought about Alexander's public declaration, about the way he defended her without hesitation, about the fierce certainty in his eyes when he looked at her. 3 days, she agreed, and then we face whatever comes together. Together, Alexander echoed. They returned to the carriage, and Alexander handed Clara up before climbing in beside her. As they pulled away from Hyde Park, Clara looked back through the window. Clusters of people still stood watching, still whispering. Lady Pemberton stood with her followers, her face twisted with barely suppressed rage. Catherine watched from beneath a tree, her expression unreadable but cold. The battle lines had been drawn. Clara had just become the most talked about, most controversial woman in London society. And in 3 days, she would become the Duchess of Ashford, a position she was spectacularly unqualified for and completely unprepared to navigate. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear was something else, something fierce and bright and almost like hope. Clara Whitmore had spent 3 years being invisible, being safe, being quietly miserable in her self-imposed exile. Now she was stepping into the light beside a man who saw her completely and chose her anyway. The cost would be brutal, the consequences devastating. But for the first time in her life, Clara felt like she was finally, genuinely alive. The carriage rolled through London's streets, carrying her toward a future she couldn't predict and a destiny she'd never imagined possible. And Clara, who had armored herself against hope for so long, finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, She was worth fighting for, after all. 3 days until she became a duchess. 3 days until everything changed forever. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, Lady Pemberton was already sharpening her knives. The storm broke before they even reached Clara's home. By the time Alexander's carriage pulled up to the Whitmore residence, 3 other carriages were already waiting outside, an unprecedented sight that made Clara's stomach drop. "Your father has visitors," Alexander observed quietly. "Unusual for this hour." Clara recognized one of the crests immediately. "That's Lord Halverton's carriage." Alexander's expression went cold. "The man your father was considering selling you to before I intervened. And the other 2 belong to business associates of my father's. This isn't a social call." Clara felt dread coil in her chest. "They've heard about Hyde Park already." "London gossip travels faster than plague." Alexander helped her down from the carriage, his hand lingering on hers. "Do you want me to come in with you?" Every fiber of Clara's being screamed yes, but she forced herself to shake her head. "No, this is between me and my father. If you're there, he'll perform for your benefit. I need to face him alone." "Clara, I'll be fine. He's never been violent, just disappointed. I can survive his disappointment." She tried to smile. "I've had years of practice." Alexander looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "I'll call on you tomorrow morning at 10. We need to finalize arrangements for the ceremony." His voice dropped. "And Clara? Whatever he says, whatever threats he makes, remember that in 3 days you'll be my wife. He'll have no power over you anymore." The reminder steadied her. Clara squeezed his hand once, then turned toward the house. She could hear raised voices before she even opened the door. "Completely unacceptable. The girl has embarrassed this family for the last time." That was Halverton's voice, nasal and imperious. Clara pushed open the door to the drawing room. Her father stood near the fireplace, face flushed with wine and fury. Lord Halverton occupied the best chair, his considerable bulk spilling over the arms. 2 other men, Lord Grimsby and Sir Horace Penworth, stood near the windows looking uncomfortable. All 4 men turned when Clara entered. "There she is," Halverton sneered. "The infamous Miss Whitmore. Tell me, girl, is it true? Did the Duke of Ashford actually claim you publicly in Hyde Park?" Clara lifted her chin. "He did." "Then he's either mad or playing some game we don't understand yet." Halverton's small eyes raked over her with undisguised contempt. "No sane man would choose you over the eligible women of London. You must have trapped him somehow, compromised yourself, perhaps?" "Mind your tongue," Clara said coldly. "You're speaking about the future Duchess of Ashford." Halverton laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Future Duchess? My dear deluded girl, there will be no wedding. The Duke's family won't allow it. His mother is already taking steps to prevent this disaster." Clara's blood went cold. "What steps?" Her father finally spoke, his voice rough. "The Duchess of Ashford has sent word through her solicitors. She's threatening to challenge Alexander's inheritance of certain properties if he proceeds with this marriage. Claims he's not of sound mind to make such decisions. That's insane. He's 32 years old and perfectly rational." "Perhaps." Gerald's expression was unreadable. "But the Duchess has influence, and she's rallying other families to oppose the match. Lord Pemberton, the Marquis of Winchester, even some members of Parliament. They're calling it unseemly haste and questioning Alexander's judgment. They can question all they want. We're still getting married." "Are you?" Halverton leaned forward, his bulk straining the chair. "Because your father and I have been discussing alternatives. With the Duke's family opposed to the match, he'll eventually see reason and withdraw his offer. When he does, you'll be utterly ruined, publicly claimed and then rejected. No man will touch you." "Except me," Halverton continued, his smile predatory. "I'm willing to overlook your damaged reputation. My previous offer still stands. Marry me, and I'll settle your father's debts and provide you with a comfortable life." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "You must be joking." "I assure you I'm quite serious. You're spoiled goods now, girl. I'm your only option." "I'd rather die alone than marry you." "Clara!" Her father's voice cracked like a whip. "Lord Halverton is being generous. You will show proper respect." "Respect?" Clara rounded on her father. You want me to respect a man who's offering to buy me like livestock? A man who just called me spoiled goods in my own drawing room. Better spoiled goods than a duchess who'll last 6 months before her husband realizes what a catastrophic mistake he's made, Halverton shot back. The Duke will tire of your sharp tongue and sharper mind. Men want comfort in their homes, not constant challenge. He'll set you aside the moment he can manage it without social embarrassment. The words hit like physical blows because part of Clara feared they were true. What if Alexander did realize he'd made a terrible mistake? What if the reality of being married to her was nothing like the romance of defending her? But then she remembered his face in Hyde Park, the absolute certainty in his voice when he'd said, "I'm choosing you, permanently. Absolutely." "You're wrong," Clara said quietly. "About Alexander, about me, about everything. And I'm done listening to men who think women are commodities to be traded for profit." She turned to leave, but her father's voice stopped her. "If you walk out that door, Clara, you're no longer my daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara turned slowly. "What did you say?" Gerald's face was mottled with rage and something that might have been desperation. "You heard me. If you proceed with this reckless marriage, if you embarrass this family further by defying the Duchess of Ashford and half of London society, I will disown you completely. No inheritance, no family support, nothing." "Father, I mean it, Clara. I've spent 3 years watching you sabotage every opportunity I've provided, watching you drive away eligible men with your inappropriate behavior and unfeminine intelligence. I gave you freedom to be yourself, and you've repaid me with humiliation." Something cracked in Clara's chest. "You gave me freedom? You tried to break me. You punished me for being smart, for having opinions, for refusing to pretend to be empty-headed. I tried to make you marriageable, to give you a future." Gerald's voice rose. "And instead you've thrown yourself at the one man whose attention will bring nothing but scandal and ruin when his family succeeds in preventing the match." "His family won't succeed. You naive child. You think love conquers all? You think the Duke's infatuation will survive his mother's opposition, his cousin's schemes, and society's contempt?" Gerald's laugh was bitter. "He'll abandon you the moment the pressure becomes too great. And then where will you be? Ruined, alone, with no family to take you back." "Then I'll be alone," Clara said steadily, though her heart was breaking. "I'd rather be ruined and alone than slowly suffocate in a marriage to someone like Halverton. I'd rather risk everything on the chance that Alexander means what he says than accept guaranteed misery with someone who views me as property." "You're making the worst mistake of your life." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Clara straightened her shoulders. "I'm marrying Alexander in 3 days. If that means losing you and whatever meager inheritance you were planning to leave me, so be it. I've survived your disappointment this long. I can survive your disownment too." She walked out before her father could respond, before the tears burning behind her eyes could fall, before she could let them see how much his rejection hurt. Margaret was waiting in the entrance hall, her face stricken. "Miss Clara, I heard—" "Pack my things," Clara said quietly. "Everything I'll need for the next 3 days. I'm leaving tonight." "But where will you go?" "To Alexander's London residence. He offered me the use of his guest quarters until the wedding." Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "If I stay here, my father will make the next 3 days unbearable. Better to leave now on my own terms." Margaret disappeared upstairs while Clara stood in the empty hall, feeling the enormity of what she'd just done crash over her. She'd just lost her family, her home, the last fragile threads connecting her to her childhood and her mother's memory. For a man she'd known for 2 days. For a marriage that half of London thought would end in disaster. The tears finally came, hot and bitter and completely unstoppable. She was still crying when Alexander's knock sounded at the door 20 minutes later. Clara opened it to find him standing there, still dressed for the park, but with worry etched across his features. "I couldn't leave," he said without preamble. "Something felt wrong, and Clara, what happened?" She meant to be strong, meant to tell him calmly and rationally about her father's ultimatum, about Halverton's presence, about her decision to leave. Instead, she collapsed into his arms and sobbed. Alexander didn't ask questions. He simply held her, one hand stroking her hair while she cried 3 years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into his coat. Finally, when the storm had passed, Clara pulled back and told him everything. Alexander's expression grew progressively darker as she spoke. By the time she finished, his jaw was tight enough to crack stone. "Your father threatened to disown you," he said flatly, "for choosing me. For choosing myself, really. He would have disowned me regardless of who I married if it meant defying his plans. And Halverton was there, in your drawing room, offering to overlook your damaged reputation." Alexander's hands had clenched into fists. "I'm going to kill him." "You can't kill a lord. It's terribly impolite." "I'll make an exception." But his voice softened when he looked at Clara's tear-stained face. "You're leaving tonight?" "I can't stay here. Not for 3 more days of his anger and Halverton's smugness, and everyone trying to convince me I'm making a catastrophic mistake." "You're not making a mistake." "Everyone seems to think I am. Your mother, your cousin, half of London society, my own father. I don't care what they think. Do you want to know what I did after I left you?" Alexander pulled her toward the settee in the entrance hall, waiting until they were both seated before continuing. "I went directly to my solicitor and had him draw up an ironclad marriage contract, one that ensures even if my mother succeeds in her threats, which she won't, you'll be financially secure for life. Protected." Clara's throat tightened. "Alexander, I also sent word to the Archbishop of Canterbury requesting his personal attendance at our wedding ceremony, not because we need his blessing, but because having him officiate makes the marriage politically unassailable. My mother can't challenge something the Archbishop himself sanctioned. You thought of everything. I thought of protecting you, which is what I should have done before taking you to Hyde Park and painting a target on your back." His expression turned fierce. "But I promise you, Clara, no one is going to destroy this. Not my mother, not your father, not Pemberton or Halverton or any of their allies. We're getting married in 3 days, and anyone who tries to stop us will regret it." "You sound very certain." "I am certain. About you, about us, about everything." He cupped her face in his hands. "But Clara, you need to be certain too. Because once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to me permanently. If you have any doubts, any at all, tell me now." Clara searched his face, looking for the moment when his conviction would waver, when he'd realize what he was taking on, a wife society despised, a woman who would embarrass him at every turn, a partner who would never be soft or easy or convenient. But all she saw was absolute determination and something that looked remarkably like love. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I'm certain." "Then pack your things. You're staying with me until the wedding. People will talk. Let them. They're already talking. At least this way you'll be safe and comfortable while they do it." Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs with 2 bags. "Everything's ready, Miss Clara." Alexander stood and took the bags from her. "Thank you, Margaret. Would you like to continue serving Miss Whitmore after the wedding? I can arrange a position in the ducal household." Margaret's eyes went wide. "Your Grace, yes, I would be honored." "Good. Report to Ashford House tomorrow morning. We'll need help preparing for the ceremony." He turned to Clara. "Ready?" Clara took one last look around the entrance hall where she'd lived for 21 years, at the portraits of ancestors who'd never approved of her, at the cold marble floors she'd walked across 1,000 times feeling alone and unwanted. Then she took Alexander's offered hand and walked out the door. Her father appeared at the top of the stairs just as they reached the threshold. "Clara," his voice was hoarse, "if you leave now, I know I'm disowned, disinherited, dead to you." Clara turned to face him, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear at his disapproval. "Goodbye, Father. I hope someday you realize that you didn't lose a daughter. You threw her away because she refused to be someone else." She didn't wait for his response. Alexander's London residence was a townhouse in Mayfair, elegant without being ostentatious, comfortable without being cold. The staff received Clara with perfect courtesy, too well trained to show surprise at the Duke bringing home his future bride 3 days before the wedding. Mrs. Henshaw, the housekeeper, showed Clara to a guest suite that was larger than her entire bedroom at home. "His Grace has arranged for a modiste to call tomorrow morning for your wedding dress," she said kindly. and the Archbishop's secretary sent word confirming his attendance. It seems you're to have quite the ceremony after all. After the housekeeper left, Clara stood in the middle of the beautiful room feeling completely unmoored. She'd burned every bridge, defied her father, lost her inheritance, thrown herself entirely on Alexander's mercy. What if Halverton was right? What if Alexander's infatuation faded once he actually had to live with her? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in." Alexander entered carrying 2 glasses of wine. "I thought you might need this." Clara accepted the glass gratefully. "Is it normal for dukes to personally deliver wine to their guests?" "Nothing about this situation is normal. I thought we'd established that." He settled into a chair near the fireplace, and Clara took the one opposite. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better. I've also been worse." Clara took a sip of wine. "Your mother is really trying to block the marriage?" "She's threatening to. My solicitor doesn't think she has grounds, but she's certainly making noise about it. I've sent word that I'll call on her tomorrow morning to discuss the matter. It won't be pleasant." "Maybe I should come with you." "Absolutely not. My mother is formidable, and she'll say things designed to make you doubt yourself, doubt us. I won't subject you to that." "I'm going to have to face her eventually. I'll be her daughter-in-law." "Yes, but not until after we're married and the situation is irreversible. Then she can rail all she wants, but she can't stop it." Alexander's expression softened. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." Her heart stuttered. "What? Are you marrying me because you love me, or because you had no other options left?" The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. This powerful duke, this man who just publicly declared war on half of society for her sake, was genuinely worried that she was settling for him. "Alexander," Clara set down her wine glass and leaned forward. "I've loved you since that night 3 years ago when you treated my questions about crop rotation like they mattered. When you spoke to me like I was a person worth engaging rather than a curiosity to be indulged. I convinced myself you'd never look at someone like me, so I buried it deep and tried to forget. But yes, I love you. Desperately, terrifyingly, completely. Then why do you keep looking for the trap? Why do you keep waiting for me to realize I've made a mistake?" "Because everyone keeps telling me I'm not good enough for you, and part of me believes them." Clara's voice cracked. "I'm not beautiful or accomplished or easy to live with. I'm argumentative and stubborn, and I will challenge you on everything. What if 6 months from now, you wake up and realize you could have had someone so much better?" Alexander crossed the space between them in 2 strides, kneeling in front of her chair so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me very carefully. I don't want someone better. I don't want beautiful and accomplished and easy. I want you, exactly as you are. Sharp edges, brutal honesty, terrible dress sense and all." His hands framed her face. "I want someone who'll argue with me when I'm wrong. Someone who'll challenge my thinking and make me sharper. Someone real instead of performed. And if you think I'm going to wake up someday and regret choosing substance over surface, then you don't know me at all." "I barely know you at all. That's the problem." "Then let me tell you who I am." Alexander's voice was fierce. "I'm someone who spent years being told I should want a decorative wife, who'd bear my heirs and stay out of my way. Someone who endured dozens of courtships with women who simpered and agreed with everything I said because they wanted the title, not the person. I'm someone who was slowly suffocating under the weight of everyone's expectations until I heard you argue about soil chemistry and realized what I'd been missing. I'm not easy to love. Neither am I. I'm controlling, I have a terrible temper when provoked, and I can be ruthlessly manipulative when I think it's necessary. Ask my cousin. She'll confirm every word." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "But Clara, here's what I know. I would rather fight with you for the rest of my life than have peaceful silence with anyone else. Does that answer your question?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. "I'm going to be a terrible duchess." "You're going to be extraordinary. Different than what people expect, yes, but extraordinary nonetheless." Alexander smiled slightly. "And anyone who disagrees can answer to me." Before Clara could overthink it, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was her first kiss, clumsy and unpracticed, but Alexander responded with a gentleness that made her chest ache. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Clara felt her entire world narrow to this moment, this man, this impossible choice that somehow felt completely right. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. 3 more days, he whispered. Then you're mine permanently. I'm already yours. The ceremony is just a formality, an important formality, one that will ensure no one, not my mother, not your father, not anyone, can tear us apart. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other while the fire crackled and London went on existing outside without them. Finally, Alexander pulled back reluctantly. I should let you rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. The modiste in the morning, then I'll deal with my mother while you finalize other arrangements. And tomorrow night we're hosting a small dinner. Clara's eyes widen. A dinner? For whom? People whose support matters. The Archbishop will attend, along with several political allies and friends who've pledged their backing. I want them to meet you before the wedding, to see for themselves what kind of woman I'm marrying. That sounds terrifying. It's strategic. If we can secure the support of influential people before the ceremony, it undercuts my mother's attempts to rally opposition. Alexander's expression turned calculating. And it sends a message to Pemberton and her followers that we're not isolated or vulnerable, that we have powerful allies willing to defend this match. You've thought of everything. I told you, I won't let anyone destroy this. He stood, pulling Clara to her feet. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start fighting back. After Alexander left, Clara prepared for bed in a daze. Everything was happening so fast, too fast to process, too overwhelming to fully comprehend. But as she lay in the enormous bed in Alexander's guest suite, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened in the past 2 days, Clara realized something important. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone. She had someone fighting beside her, someone who saw all her flaws and sharp edges and loved her anyway, someone who'd burned his own bridges to keep her safe. The cost was astronomical, the risks were genuine, but the alternative, returning to that half-life of isolation and performance, was unthinkable now. Clara had jumped off the cliff. Now she just had to trust that Alexander would catch her, or better yet, that they'd figure out how to fly together. The next morning brought chaos. The modiste arrived at 8 with an army of assistants and enough fabric samples to outfit an entire ballroom. She took one look at Clara and declared the situation challenging, but not impossible. You have good bones, Madame Levesque announced in heavily accented English. An unusual coloring. We work with this, not against it. No pastels, they wash you out. Something bold, rich, a statement. 3 hours later, Clara stood in front of a mirror wearing a wedding dress unlike anything she'd ever seen. Deep sapphire silk that made her gray eyes look almost silver. Simple lines that emphasized her figure without overwhelming it. No ruffles, no excessive ornamentation, just elegant, honest beauty. I look, Clara struggled for words. Like yourself, Madame Levesque finished smiling. Exactement. The Duke, he will be speechless. While the modiste's team made final adjustments, Alexander was across town confronting his mother. He returned just after noon looking grim but satisfied. How bad was it? Clara asked, meeting him in the study. Brutal. She threatened everything short of physical violence. Alexander poured himself a drink. Whiskey, not wine, which told Clara exactly how the meeting had gone. She called you a fortune hunter, a social climber, and several other things I won't repeat. She claimed I was having some kind of breakdown and needed medical intervention. Clara's stomach dropped. Maybe she's right to be concerned. This is happening very fast. She's not concerned. She's controlling. Alexander's voice was sharp. My mother has spent my entire adult life trying to orchestrate every aspect of my existence. She selected my tutors, my friends, my political affiliations. She's been planning my marriage since I was 20. The fact that I've chosen someone she didn't approve is intolerable to her. What did you tell her? That I'm marrying you in 2 days regardless of her approval, that I've secured the Archbishop's attendance and several key political allies, that her threats are meaningless and her opposition futile. Alexander's expression was granite, and that if she continues attempting to sabotage our marriage, she'll find herself significantly less welcome in my life going forward. Alexander, she's your mother. She's a woman who views people as chess pieces to be moved according to her grand strategy. You're not a piece, Clara. Neither am I, and I'm done playing her games. He crossed to where Clara stood and took her hands. But I need you to be prepared. She'll attend the wedding. She has to for appearance's sake. And she'll smile and play the gracious mother-in-law in public. But privately, she'll be looking for ways to undermine us, to drive wedges between us, to prove that this marriage was a mistake. Then we don't give her any openings. Exactly. Alexander's smile was grim. United front, always. No matter what she says or does, we present a unified position. Agreed? Agreed. That evening's dinner was exactly as terrifying as Clara had anticipated. 8 guests arrived at Ashford House at 7 o'clock sharp. The Archbishop of Canterbury, elderly but sharp-eyed. Lord Whitmore, not Clara's father, but a distant cousin who held a seat in Parliament. Lady Blackwood, a formidable political hostess whose endorsement could make or break social standing. Several others whose names and titles blurred together in Clara's nervousness. They gathered in the formal dining room, and Clara felt every eye assessing her, measuring, judging. The Archbishop spoke first. Miss Whitmore, the Duke has told us quite a bit about you. I confess, I'm curious to meet the woman who's caused such upheaval in London society. It wasn't quite an insult, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. Your Grace, Clara kept her voice steady. I assure you I never intended to cause upheaval. I merely refuse to pretend to be someone I'm not. If that's disruptive, perhaps the disruption was necessary. Lady Blackwood's eyebrows rose. Boldly stated, though one wonders if such boldness will serve you well as a duchess. The position requires a certain level of diplomacy. I can be diplomatic when the situation warrants it, Clara said, but I won't be dishonest. If that's incompatible with being a duchess, then perhaps the role needs redefinition. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then the Archbishop laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. By heavens, she's got spirit! He turned to Alexander with something like approval. I begin to see why you've chosen her, Ashford. London could use more honesty and less performance. The tension in the room shifted, not gone entirely, but eased. Over dinner, Clara found herself drawn into genuine conversation. The Archbishop had strong opinions about agricultural reform that aligned remarkably well with her own research. Lord Whitmore wanted to discuss education policy and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. Even Lady Blackwood thawed slightly when Clara proved capable of discussing political strategy without fawning or flattering. By the time dessert was served, Clara realized something extraordinary was happening. These people, powerful, influential people, were taking her seriously, not as Alexander's unusual choice, not as a curiosity or a scandal, but as a thinking person whose opinions had value. As the guests were leaving, the Archbishop pulled Clara aside. My dear, I'll be frank. When Alexander first approached me about officiating this wedding, I had reservations. The haste, the controversy, the opposition from his family, it all suggested poor judgment on his part. He smiled kindly. But having met you, I understand. You're not what London expects in a duchess. You're something far more valuable. You're real. Don't let them break that spirit. I'll try not to, Your Grace. More than trying, promise me. The aristocracy needs people willing to challenge its assumptions. Be that person, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. After the last guest departed, Clara found Alexander in the study looking more relaxed than she'd seen him since Hyde Park. That went well, he said, pouring them both wine. They didn't hate me. They respected you. There's a difference. Alexander handed her a glass. Lady Blackwood pulled me aside before she left, said you were refreshingly honest, and she'd make sure her social circle knew we had her support. The Archbishop gave me advice about not letting anyone break my spirit. Good advice. Alexander raised his glass. To 2 more days of chaos before we make this permanent. Clara clinked her glass against his. To surviving the chaos. But even as she said it, Clara felt something shift in her chest, something that felt remarkably like hope taking root and refusing to be dislodged. She'd faced her father's rejection, Alexander's mother's opposition, society's contempt, and she was still standing. More than standing, she was fighting back. And in 2 days, she would become the Duchess of Ashford. Not because she'd transformed herself into someone acceptable, but because she'd refused to transform at all. The woman who'd worn an ugly dress to disappear was about to become impossible to ignore. And this time, Clara was ready for the attention. The morning of the wedding dawned cold and crystalline, London wrapped in frost that made everything look sharp and new. Clara woke in Alexander's guest suite feeling strangely calm. No panic, no last-minute doubts, just a bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. Margaret arrived with breakfast and news. "Miss Clara, there's already a crowd forming outside the chapel. Word must have spread about the Archbishop officiating. Half of London wants to witness this." Her expression was anxious. Lady Blackwood sent a note saying she's arranged for additional security. Apparently there have been threats. Clara's stomach dropped. What kind of threats? Nothing specific, just angry letters to His Grace's household. People calling the marriage inappropriate, saying you've bewitched him somehow. Margaret's hands twisted in her apron. Some are saying terrible things about you. That you're a fortune hunter. That you've trapped the Duke through manipulation. Margaret. Clara kept her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. I appreciate the warning, but we both knew this was coming. London society doesn't like being challenged. But what if they try to disrupt the ceremony? What if... Then Alexander and I will handle it together. Clara took Margaret's hand, squeezing gently. Today, I'm marrying the man I love. Everything else is just noise. She wished she felt as confident as she sounded. 2 hours later, Clara stood before the mirror in her sapphire wedding dress while Margaret arranged her hair. Simple, elegant, honest, just like Madame Levesque had promised. You look beautiful, Miss Clara, Margaret whispered. Your mother would be so proud. Clara felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. Her mother had died believing Clara would never marry, that her intelligence and honesty had made her unmarriageable. If only she could see this moment. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Alexander entered, then stopped dead at the sight of her. You're not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony, Clara said, but her voice was breathless. I don't care about superstition. Alexander crossed to her, his eyes dark and intense. Clara, I don't have words. That's a first. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I need to tell you something before we leave for the chapel. My mother arrived in London last night. She's demanded to attend the ceremony. I thought she was coming anyway. She is, but she brought reinforcements. Catherine, Lord Pemberton, several other family members and allies. They're planning something. Alexander's jaw tightened. My sources say they intend to object during the ceremony, to publicly challenge the marriage. Clara felt ice flood her veins. Can they do that? Technically, yes. There's a moment during the ceremony when the officiant asks if anyone objects. It's mostly ceremonial. Objections rarely hold legal weight unless there's genuine impediment like existing marriage or consanguinity. But they can still voice them and create maximum embarrassment and scandal in the process. Clara's hands had started shaking. What do we do? We proceed exactly as planned. Let them object, let them make their scene, and then we marry anyway with the Archbishop's blessing and half of London watching. Alexander caught her trembling hands. Clara, they're hoping we'll panic and postpone, that we'll give them time to rally more opposition. We can't give them that opening. So we walk into the trap knowing it's there. We spring the trap and prove it can't hold us. His expression was fierce. Are you with me? Clara thought about everything that had led to this moment. The 3 years of hiding, the ugly brown dress, the public humiliation in Hyde Park. The dinner with the Archbishop, the loss of her father's approval, the threats and whispers and constant judgment. And then she thought about Alexander defending her without hesitation, about being seen and chosen and loved exactly as she was. I'm with you, she said firmly. Always. The chapel was packed when they arrived. Clara had expected a small ceremony, witnesses and close friends only. Instead, at least 200 people crowded the pews, standing room only along the walls. The Archbishop stood at the altar in full ceremonial vestments, flanked by 2 bishops Clara didn't recognize. This wasn't a private wedding. This was a spectacle. and in the front row, wearing black like mourners, sat the Duchess of Ashford, Catherine, Lord Pemberton, and a dozen others whose expressions ranged from hostile to calculating. Clara's courage wavered. Alexander felt her hesitate and tightened his grip on her arm. "Breathe, I'm right here." They walked down the aisle together, a deliberate choice on Alexander's part. No giving away, no transferring ownership from father to husband. Just two people choosing each other, witnessed by everyone who'd tried to keep them apart. The walk felt eternal. Every eye tracked their progress. Clara heard whispers, gasps, the rustle of scandal spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Then she saw Lady Blackwood in the third row, nodding approval, the Archbishop at the altar, his expression kind, Lord Whitmore standing as an official witness, looking proud rather than ashamed. And she remembered, she had allies too, powerful ones. They reached the altar. The Archbishop raised his hands for silence. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying through the chapel, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Alexander James Blackthorne, Duke of Ashford, and Clara Elizabeth Whitmore in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Clara. She tried to focus, tried to be present in this moment, but part of her was waiting for the explosion. It came exactly when she expected. "If any person can show just cause why these two may not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then the Duchess of Ashford rose to her feet. "I object." The chapel erupted. Gasps, shocked whispers, people craning to see better. Clara felt Alexander go rigid beside her, but he didn't move, didn't turn around, just stared straight ahead at the Archbishop with absolute focus. The Archbishop's expression didn't change. "On what grounds, Your Grace?" "On the grounds that this marriage is being undertaken with unseemly haste and without proper consideration for the consequences to the Ashford family name. My son is not thinking clearly. He's been manipulated by a woman of questionable character who seeks only his title and fortune." The accusations hung in the air like poison. Clara felt humiliation burn through her. Every fear she'd ever had about not being good enough, being too difficult, being unmarriageable. All of it confirmed in front of 200 witnesses. But before she could respond, Alexander turned to face his mother. "You're right," he said calmly. "I haven't been thinking clearly." Clara's heart stopped. Was he agreeing? Was he calling this off? "For years," Alexander continued, his voice carrying through the shocked silence, "I accepted that I should marry whoever you selected, whoever fit your vision of an appropriate duchess. I pretended that love and partnership didn't matter as long as I fulfilled social obligations and produced heirs. I convinced myself that wanting more was foolish and unrealistic." He turned to look at Clara, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. But Clara changed that. She showed me what I'd been missing, what I'd been settling for. She challenged me to want more than performance and pretense, to demand honesty and intelligence and real partnership. Alexander's voice strengthened. "So yes, Mother, you're absolutely right. I'm not thinking clearly by your standards, because your standards value appearance over substance, breeding over character, and control over love. And I'm done living by those standards." The Duchess went pale. "Alexander, I'm marrying Clara today, with or without your blessing, with or without your approval, because she is the only woman in London, in England, who makes me want to be better instead of smaller. And if you can't accept that, then you're not welcome in my life going forward." The chapel was utterly silent. Then Catherine stood, her face twisted with something between anger and desperation. "Alexander, you're throwing away everything. The family's reputation, your political future, your standing in society, all for a woman who isn't even beautiful or accomplished or remotely suitable for—" "Careful." Alexander's voice went deadly quiet. "You're about to insult my wife, and I promise you, Catherine, if you finish that sentence, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Catherine faltered, clearly not expecting such absolute opposition. But Lord Pemberton wasn't finished. He rose, his florid face flushed with righteousness. "This is madness. The girl is nobody, no family, no fortune, no accomplishments worth mentioning. She's been rejected by every eligible man in London for 3 seasons. And now we're supposed to believe the Duke has suddenly discovered her hidden virtues?" His laugh was cruel. "She's trapped him somehow, compromised him, or manipulated him, or Lord Pemberton. The Archbishop's voice cut through the accusation like steel. You will cease speaking immediately, or I will have you removed from this chapel. Pemberton blinked, clearly not expecting the Archbishop to intervene. You have accused Miss Whitmore of entrapment and manipulation without a shred of evidence. You have insulted her character, her worth, and her integrity in front of this entire congregation. The Archbishop's expression was granite. I have spent considerable time with both Miss Whitmore and the Duke over the past days. I have questioned them extensively about their reasons for this marriage, and I can state categorically that this union is based on genuine affection, mutual respect, and shared values, not entrapment, not manipulation. Love. He turned his gaze to the Duchess. As for you, Your Grace, your objection has been noted and overruled. You have not demonstrated just cause, only personal disapproval, which is not grounds to prevent a marriage between two consenting adults. The Archbishop's tone softened slightly. Your son has chosen a woman of remarkable intelligence and character. You may disagree with his choice, but that does not make it wrong. It simply makes it his choice to make. The Duchess sat down abruptly, looking shaken. The Archbishop returned his attention to Clara and Alexander. Shall we continue? Alexander nodded, but Clara found her voice. Wait. She turned to face the congregation, her heart hammering but her voice steady. I need to say something. Alexander looked surprised but nodded permission. Clara took a breath and addressed the crowd. You're all right. I'm not beautiful by London standards. I'm not accomplished in the ways that matter to society. I can't play piano beautifully or paint watercolors or simper and smile on command. I'm too opinionated, too intelligent, too honest for my own good. I've spent 3 seasons being rejected and dismissed and told repeatedly that I'm unmarriageable. She saw agreement on many faces, satisfaction on others. They thought she was confirming their worst opinions. But here's what I've learned. Those rejections weren't failures. They were escapes. Because every man who rejected me wanted someone who would shrink herself to fit his expectations, someone who would pretend to be less intelligent, less capable, less herself. And I refused. I would rather be alone forever than diminish myself for someone else's comfort. Clara's voice grew stronger. Alexander doesn't want me to be smaller. He wants me to be exactly who I am, difficult, argumentative, honest, and real. He chose me not despite my flaws, but because he sees them as strengths, because he values partnership over performance. And yes, we've only known each other for days in terms of actual conversation. But I've loved him for 3 years. 3 years of watching him from afar and knowing he was the only man in London who might actually see me as a person instead of a problem. She turned to the Duchess. So, Your Grace, you're right to object. I'm not the Duchess you wanted for your son. I'll embarrass you at parties. I'll argue with your political allies. I'll say inappropriate things and refuse to perform the role society expects. But I will love your son with everything I have. I will challenge him and support him and stand beside him through everything. And if that's not enough for you, then I'm truly sorry. But it's enough for him, and that's all that matters. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from the third row, Lady Blackwood began to applaud. It started small, just her hands clapping slowly, deliberately. Then the Archbishop joined in. Then Lord Whitmore. Then others scattered throughout the chapel, until at least half the congregation was applauding. Not everyone. The Duchess sat frozen. Catherine looked furious. Pemberton and his allies remained rigidly silent, but enough people were applauding to make it clear Clara had allies. People who respected her honesty and courage. People who were tired of the performance and pretense that dominated their world. The Archbishop raised his hands for silence. Unless there are any other objections, legitimate objections with actual legal standing, we will proceed with the ceremony. No one spoke. Excellent. Then by the power vested in me by the Church and the Crown, I will now conduct this marriage. Alexander, Clara, please join hands. Clara's hands were shaking as Alexander took them, but his grip was steady, solid, absolutely certain. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of vows and blessings. Clara heard herself promise to love and honor, heard Alexander's voice strong and clear as he made the same promises, felt the weight of the ring as he slipped it onto her finger, a simple gold band engraved with words she'd read later. And then the Archbishop was pronouncing them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Alexander cupped Clara's face in his hands and kissed her thoroughly, possessively, in front of everyone who'd tried to keep them apart. The chapel erupted in applause and cheers, not universal, but loud enough to drown out any remaining opposition. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Alexander whispered, "Hello, Duchess." Clara laughed, feeling tears stream down her face. "Hello, husband." They walked back down the aisle together, and this time Clara felt no fear. She saw the Duchess's stricken expression, Catherine's fury, Pemberton's disgust, and felt nothing but pity for people so invested in a system that they couldn't see beyond it. She also saw Lady Blackwood's proud smile, the Archbishop's nod of approval, and dozens of other faces showing genuine happiness and support. The battle wasn't over. There would be more whispers, more social challenges, more people trying to prove this marriage was a mistake. But Clara was no longer fighting alone. She was the Duchess of Ashford now, with all the power and protection that title conveyed, and she had a partner who'd proven willing to burn down the world for her sake. Outside the chapel, a massive crowd had gathered. Hundreds of people, servants, merchants, common Londoners who'd heard about the scandalous wedding and come to witness it. When Clara and Alexander emerged, a cheer went up that rattled the windows. "They're cheering for us," Clara said in wonder. "They're cheering for you," Alexander corrected. "Word has spread about what you said in the chapel, about refusing to shrink yourself. It's resonating with people who felt the same pressure to be less than they are." A young woman pushed forward from the crowd, holding a handful of wildflowers. "Your Grace," she called out, "these are for you. Thank you for saying what so many of us feel but can't voice." Clara accepted the flowers, throat tight with emotion. More people pressed forward, not aristocrats in fine clothes, but working people, servants, shopkeepers, all offering congratulations and support. "You've become a symbol," Alexander murmured, "the woman who refused to bend and won anyway." "I didn't win. We both did." "Then let's celebrate our victory properly." The wedding breakfast was held at Ashford House, with the guest list carefully curated to include only those who'd supported the marriage. The Duchess had declined to attend, claiming illness. Catherine and her allies were conspicuously absent, but the Archbishop came, along with Lady Blackwood and 24 other influential people whose backing transformed Clara from scandalous choice to legitimate Duchess. During the toast, Lord Whitmore stood and raised his glass. "To the Duke and Duchess of Ashford. May your marriage set a new standard for what partnership can be, honest, equal, and based on genuine regard rather than social calculation." The guests cheered. Clara felt Alexander's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. As the celebration continued around them, Alexander leaned close to whisper, "1 month ago, you wore an ugly dress trying to disappear. Now you're the most talked about woman in England. Is that a good thing? It's an honest thing. You're not invisible anymore, Clara. You're unforgettable." That evening, after the guests had departed and the house had quieted, Clara stood in Alexander's private suite, now their private suite, staring out at London's glittering lights. Alexander came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. "None." "You?" "Not a single one." He pressed a kiss to her neck. "Though I imagine tomorrow will bring fresh challenges. My mother won't give up easily. Neither will Pemberton and his allies. Let them try. I'm done hiding from people's disapproval." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "I spent 3 years making myself small and invisible because I thought that was the only way to survive. But you showed me something different. You showed me that refusing to bend can be its own kind of strength. You showed me that first. I just had the good sense to recognize it." They stood there in the quiet, two people who'd chosen each other against all advice and expectation, holding each other while London whispered and schemed and tried to make sense of the impossible. Clara thought about her father, who'd disowned her for this choice, about her mother, who died believing Clara would never marry, about the 3 years of loneliness and rejection that had brought her to that fateful afternoon in her ugly brown dress. And she realized she wouldn't change any of it, because every rejection had been preparation for this acceptance. Every moment of being told she was too much had strengthened her for this moment of being chosen exactly as she was. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked. "That I'm glad I wore that hideous dress. If I'd tried to be beautiful and appropriate, you might have dismissed me like everyone else did. But because I was honest, brutally, aggressively honest, you saw the real me. I would have noticed you anyway. I'd been watching you for 3 years. But you never approached me. Because I was a coward, I saw what society did to women like you. Brilliant, honest women who refused to perform. I watched them get broken down and dismissed, and I was afraid that approaching you would paint a target on your back. Alexander's expression darkened. I should have been braver sooner. No, the timing was perfect. 3 years ago, I wasn't ready for this. I hadn't learned to fight back yet. I would have crumbled under the pressure. Clara smiled. But now I'm ready for war. Good, because it's coming. But war could wait until tomorrow. Tonight was for celebration. For two people who'd refused to be diminished finally being allowed to be fully themselves. Clara had worn her worst dress to disappear. Instead, she'd been seen by the one person who mattered most. And now, standing in her husband's arms with her new title and her new life stretching ahead like an unwritten book, Clara finally understood what her mother had meant all those years ago. Men didn't want mirrors that reflected their brilliance. Weak men wanted mirrors. Strong men wanted windows, wanted to see the truth even when it was uncomfortable, wanted partners who challenged them to be better rather than smaller. Alexander was a strong man, and Clara was no longer afraid to be a window. The weeks that followed the wedding were exactly as difficult as predicted. The Duchess of Ashford refused all contact with Clara, communicating only through frigid letters to Alexander about family business. Catherine spread vicious rumors about the marriage's inevitable collapse. Lord Pemberton and his allies excluded Clara from their social events and encouraged others to do the same, but something unexpected happened. For every door that closed, 2 others opened. Women who'd felt similarly pressured to perform began seeking Clara out, wanting to know how she'd found the courage to be herself. Young ladies trapped in the marriage market saw her as proof that refusing to bend wasn't career suicide. Even some men began quietly admitting that they were tired of the performance too. Lady Blackwood became a powerful ally, using her considerable social influence to normalize Clara's presence in elite circles. The Archbishop publicly praised her refreshing honesty and moral courage. Slowly, grudgingly, society began to accept that the Duchess of Ashford was different, and perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. 6 months after the wedding, Clara hosted her first major social event as Duchess, a charity dinner to raise funds for rural education. She'd debated about the guest list extensively with Alexander, knowing that including certain people would cause problems. In the end, she'd invited everyone: the Duchess of Ashford, Catherine, Pemberton, Halverton. Every person who'd tried to prevent or undermine the marriage received an invitation. Most declined, but a few accepted, clearly curious about what kind of disaster the unmarriageable Clara would create as hostess. The evening of the dinner, Clara stood in Ashford House's grand ballroom, wearing a gown of deep emerald that made her look regal without trying to compete with London's traditional beauties. Alexander stood beside her, and together they received their guests. Lady Blackwood arrived first, embracing Clara warmly. "You look magnificent, my dear. This will be the event of the season." Lord Whitmore came with his wife, both offering genuine congratulations on Clara's first major hosting duty. And then, shockingly, the Duchess of Ashford appeared. She was dressed in black, her expression carefully neutral. She curtsied to Alexander, then turned to Clara. For a long moment, the two women stared at each other. 6 months of silence and opposition hanging between them. Finally, the Duchess spoke. "Your Grace?" The title came out stiff, resentful, but it came. "You've hosted a lovely evening." It wasn't an apology, wasn't acceptance or approval, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that Clara's position as Duchess of Ashford was permanent and legitimate. "Thank you, Your Grace," Clara replied evenly. "I'm honored you chose to attend." The Duchess's mouth tightened, but she nodded and moved into the ballroom. Alexander leaned close to Clara. "That cost her. Attending this event, acknowledging your title in front of society. She's essentially admitting defeat. Or she's planning something. Probably both. But Clara, she came. That matters." The dinner was a triumph. Clara had organized speakers on education reform, including several former teachers who spoke movingly about the need for rural schools. She'd arranged for donations to be matched by several wealthy attendees, raising 3 times her initial goal. And she'd done it all while being completely herself. No simpering, no performing, just honest passion for a cause she believed in. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Lady Pemberton approached Clara. She looked older than she had 6 months ago, less certain of her power. "Duchess?" Pemberton's tone was formal, cold. "I must admit, tonight was impressive. You've proven more capable than I anticipated." It was the closest thing to an apology Clara would ever receive from her. "Thank you, Lady Pemberton. I appreciate your attendance and your support of the cause." Pemberton's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't mistake acknowledgement for approval. You're still unsuitable for this position. You always will be." "Perhaps," Clara agreed calmly. "But I'm here anyway, and I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, something that might have been respect flickered across Pemberton's face. Then she curtsied stiffly and departed. After the last guest left, Clara and Alexander stood alone in the empty ballroom. "You did it," Alexander said quietly. "You won them over. Not everyone, but enough." "I didn't win them over. I just proved I couldn't be broken." Clara leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. "There's a difference. An important difference." Alexander wrapped his arms around her. "I'm proud of you." "For what? For surviving 6 months of their contempt? For refusing to let it change you? For staying honest even when dishonesty would have been easier? For being exactly who you are despite enormous pressure to be someone else?" He tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. "You're extraordinary, Clara, and every day you prove that choosing you was the best decision I've ever made." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Even when I argue with your business partners about politics?" "Especially then. Even when I embarrass you at parties by discussing subjects ladies aren't supposed to understand. Every single time. Even when your mother sends those passive-aggressive letters about my unfortunate tendency toward masculine intellectualism." Alexander laughed. "Particularly then. Her disapproval just confirms I chose correctly." They swayed together in the empty ballroom, the candles burning low, the night wrapping around them like a promise. "I love you," Clara whispered. "For seeing me when everyone else wanted me invisible. For choosing me when everyone said I was unmarriageable. For making me believe I was worth fighting for." "I love you," Alexander replied. "For refusing to shrink. For being brave enough to wear that hideous brown dress and honest enough to challenge me. For showing me what real partnership looks like." 1 year after their wedding, Clara stood in the gardens of Ashford Manor, the ducal estate in the countryside where she and Alexander had escaped London's scrutiny. She was 8 months pregnant, her belly round and obvious beneath her simple day dress. Margaret fussed nearby, insisting Clara should be resting instead of walking in the cool autumn air. But Clara needed this moment, needed to feel the wind on her face and remember how far she'd traveled from that afternoon when she'd worn her worst dress, expecting disappointment, and found hope instead. Alexander found her by the rose garden, his expression softening when he saw her. "The doctor said you should be resting." "The doctor says a lot of things. I'm choosing which advice to follow." Clara smiled. "That seems to be my pattern." Alexander laughed and joined her on the bench, carefully arranging his arm around her expanded waist. "Our daughter is going to be just as stubborn as you," he said, resting his hand on Clara's belly. "Good. The world needs more stubborn women." Clara covered his hand with hers. "Have you heard from your mother?" "Actually, yes. She sent word that she'd like to visit when the baby arrives, to meet her granddaughter." Clara's eyebrows rose. "That's progress. Grudging progress, but progress nonetheless." Alexander's expression was thoughtful. "I think she's finally realized that you're not going anywhere, that our marriage is solid, that her opposition accomplished nothing except driving a wedge between us. Will you let her visit? That's your decision as much as mine. She's hurt you repeatedly. If you're not ready to welcome her, let her come," Clara said quietly. "Not because I've forgiven her, but because our daughter deserves to know her grandmother, even if that grandmother struggles to accept her daughter-in-law." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon and paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked. "Marrying me? taking on all the complications that came with it? Clara thought about the question seriously, about the social battles, the whispers, the constant judgment from people who thought she wasn't good enough. Then she thought about the women who sought her out for advice, the young ladies who saw her as proof that refusing to perform didn't mean dying alone, the slowly growing acceptance that maybe duchesses didn't all have to fit the same mold. And she thought about Alexander, the man who'd seen her completely and chosen her anyway, who'd fought beside her through every challenge, who'd never once asked her to be smaller or softer or more acceptable. Not once, Clara said firmly. Not for a single moment. Even when Lady Pemberton cuts you in public? Even then. Her disapproval just proves I'm doing something right. Alexander laughed and pressed a kiss to her temple. Our daughter is going to be raised so differently from how we were. No pressure to perform, no expectations to be anything except herself. Terrifying thought. We're going to create a tiny version of me. The world should be so lucky. As darkness fell and they returned to the manor house, Clara thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, the one who'd armored herself in ugly dresses and convinced herself that invisibility was safety. That girl would barely recognize the woman Clara had become, Duchess of Ashford, wife to a man who loved her fiercely, soon to be mother to a daughter who would grow up knowing she didn't have to shrink herself to be valued. Most importantly, Clara had become someone who no longer apologized for taking up space, who argued and challenged and refused to perform, who proved every day that being yourself, completely, honestly, unapologetically yourself, wasn't a flaw. It was the only thing worth being. Clara had worn her worst dress to disappear. Instead, she'd become impossible to ignore. And in becoming unforgettable, she'd shown other women that they could do the same. That refusing to bend wasn't weakness, it was the truest form of strength. The unmarriageable girl had become a duchess, not by transforming into someone acceptable, but by refusing to transform at all. And that made all the difference.